Chapter 668. Before dawn, it was the darkest. When people said this phrase, they often wanted to express that as long as they could get through this darkest period, they would be able to welcome the clear and beautiful light of dawn. This was the principle of hope always existing. However, when dawn truly arrived, what did it have to do with that darkest period? Time was life. Once it was gone, it cannot be turned back. There had never been a connection between the light of others and one's own darkness. I've always thought that I was the sun. The Tianhai divine empress gazed at the extremely faint light in the east, at the rising sun that still could not leap over the horizon. I want to illuminate the world. All who oppose me will inevitably be burned to death by the sunlight, unable to hide. Her words, or rather her thoughts, were as powerful and domineering as always. Yet, she wasn't standing on the dew platform or the edge of the divine path, looking down at her own world from above. She was currently lying in Chun Changsheng's embrace, just like a normal woman, slightly light and powerless. Chun Changsheng felt it the clearest. Upon hearing these words, he inexplicably felt sad. How can it be possible to kill everyone? Yesterday in the imperial palace, Su Yurong had once expressed a similar opinion. At the time, the divine empress's answer had been very simple and unyielding, but now she did not give this answer. This was because many things that had happened during this long night had proven her theory wrong. She was quiet for a while, then said, "Yes, it's impossible to kill everyone." These words were very light and without much taste, but when Chun Changsheng heard them, he felt very sorrowful and extremely sour. He wanted to say something to comfort her on the verge of death, but he didn't know what to say. Suddenly, he heard a sound from the forest by the divine path. He held the Tianhai divine empress and looked over, his right hand once more gripping the hilt of his sword, his expression very vigilant. The forest at the peak of the mausoleum of books was extremely dense, covered in thorny shrubs. There had never been a path, and after being drenched by the torrential rain, it had become even more muddy and difficult to traverse. Coupled with the fact that there had always been a seal, who could have come here? The shrubs were flattened, mud flew, and Yurin crawled out. In the middle of the night, he had been arduously climbing through the mausoleum of books. His hands and body were covered in wounds, blood mixed with mud, and he looked extremely dismal. Upon arriving at the peak of the mausoleum of books, the first thing Yurin saw was Chun Changsheng holding a beautiful woman. He didn't know why, but he felt that the woman was very dangerous. He opened his mouth, and his face was full of anxiety. He shouted and rushed over, wanted to pull Chun Changsheng away and protect him behind him. However, when he limped in front of Chun Changsheng, he stopped, because he felt that the beautiful woman was somewhat familiar. She was also pale and covered in blood like him. She looked very pitiful. Yurin's medical skills were brilliant, and his heart was benevolent. In his 2 years in Xining Village and traveling the world, he would often treat those poor people who did not have the money to treat their illnesses. After confirming that his junior brother was fine, he subconsciously wanted to treat the woman, but in the next moment, he realized that there was no hope for this woman. What was going on? What exactly happened? When Yurin crawled out of the shrubbery, his body covered in blood, Chun Changsheng was very shocked because he had not expected that his senior brother had always been in the mausoleum of books. Then he was very moved because he knew that his senior brother had assuredly heard his voice and came to save him. Then he felt very guilty. For some reason, he just felt very guilty. The Tianhai divine empress gazed at the crippled and blind young Taoist, slightly raising her brows, perhaps out of joy, shock, or some other emotion. "This is your senior brother." "Yes." Chun Changsheng turned to Yurin and said, "Senior, this is your mother." Yurin froze, looking at the beautiful woman in Chun Changsheng's arms. He opened his mouth, but he didn't know what to say. Perhaps it was because he had never been able to say anything. The Tianhai divine empress looked at Chun Changsheng and asked, "Then just who are you?" "I don't know." Chun Changsheng was a little perplexed. "I originally believed myself to be Sir's son, but it turns out that I am not." The Tianhai divine empress asked, "Is it very shameful to be my son?" Chen Changsheng thought this over, then replied, "If I can be Sir's son, it should be a very proud matter, right? One is dull, one is foolish, truly." The Tianhai Divine Empress glanced at Chen Changsheng, then at Yurun. Finally, she glanced at the night sky, which was still radiating with endless radiance, and said, "But we still have two sons." When she said these words, her mood was very calm and indifferent, but it was also intensely mocking. In short, it was extremely complicated. After saying that, she didn't say anything else. After looking at Chen Changsheng, Yurun, and the starry sky, she looked at nothing else like this world. She closed her eyes. Chen Changsheng sensed that the woman in his arms was no longer breathing, sensed that her soul had left. His face became abnormally pale, as if he had also lost his soul. After some time, he finally struggled to turn his head and look at Yurun. "She is the Divine Empress. Senior, your birth mother." In his entire life, he had never spoken with such difficulty, his words coming off and on. As soon as he finished speaking, he began to cry. He hugged the Tianhai Divine Empress's body and wept, "Senior, I'm sorry. I also don't know what's going on." Yurun also began to cry. He incessantly made gestures with his hands, also expressing his apologies. Chen Changsheng incessantly cried, incessantly saying sorry. Yurun incessantly cried, gesturing that he was sorry. Chen Changsheng didn't know why he was saying sorry to his senior brother. Yurun also didn't know why he was saying sorry to his junior brother. If carefully analyzed, this sorrowful apology was naturally reasonable, but at this moment, it was impossible to clearly explain. Perhaps it was because this world had let them down, but they had nowhere to find a reason. The rain had stopped long ago. Whether it was the torrential rain or the drizzle that fell from the heavens and earth in response, they had all stopped. The sun had still not completely risen over the horizon, but the sea of clouds was already beginning to glow. The eastern sky was about to break. The Pope did not suppress his injuries and returned to the Li Palace. Wu Qianbai carried her husband, heavily injured and on the verge of death, out of the capital. From Luoyang, Shang Xingzhou arrived at the Mausoleum of Books. Many ministers of the great Zhou imperial court, the soldiers of the imperial guard and the city guard, and the forces of the orthodoxy had already arrived at the Mausoleum of Books. The Lotus Sea had already vanished, and the sea of people surrounded the Mausoleum of Books like a tide. Tianhai Chenwu had brought his loyal subordinates and also arrived at the base of the divine path. His expression was very indifferent, devoid of sorrow. Su Shiji, who had not appeared for an entire night, also came. His face was expressionless, his thoughts inscrutable. So-called familial love was all fake. So-called loyalty was sometimes also fake. The sky passed day by day, and the earth also passed by day. Just how many dynasties could the people or affairs of the world endure? Shang Xingzhou walked up to the peak of the Mausoleum of Books. Han Qing made way. Shang Xingzhou stepped onto the divine path, his Taoist robe drifting in the wind, as if he was not a person of the mortal world. Chen Changsheng gazed at his master, gradually walking up the divine path, and sensed his will. He carried the Tianhai Divine Empress's body on his back and walked down the Mausoleum of Books. During this entire process, Yu Ren's gaze had always rested on him and the Tianhai Divine Empress's body. There was only one path to the Mausoleum of Books. Shang Xingzhou walked down the divine path. Chen Changsheng carried the Tianhai Divine Empress's body down the mountain. Master and disciple met in the middle of the divine path. Shang Xingzhou did not glance at him. He also did not glance at Shang Xingzhou. Master and disciple brushed past each other, acting like strangers. After some time, Chen Changsheng vanished into the forest beneath the Mausoleum of Books. Shang Xingzhou arrived at the peak of the Mausoleum of Books. He lovingly and majestically rubbed Yu Ren's head, and then he took Yu Ren's uninjured hand. He brought Yu Ren to the edge of the divine path. At the highest place in the world, he raised Yu Ren's hand. The princes of the Qin clan, the representatives of the various sects and clans, countless officials of the great Zhou, priests of the Li Palace, and soldiers all kneeled on the ground. Like a tide, they all cried, "Long live." The morning sun rose, illuminating the peak of the mausoleum of books. The morning light fell on the monolith. This was the tallest monolith of the mausoleum of books. There were no words, no lines, no designs on it. As it turned out, there was nothing at all. Volume 4, Dawn Ends in the Eastern Sky. Chapter 669. 3 days later, the capital had regained its calm. The Yulin royal guards were heavily guarded outside the imperial palace. Their expressions were as cold and resolute as usual. Only the most attentive people could see the tiredness and a tinge of bewilderment in the eyes of those officers and soldiers. The city gate guards were under strict orders to constantly patrol the markets and arrest many thieves who wanted to take advantage of the chaos to rebel. There was no problem with public security. The populace once again busied themselves with their livelihoods. In their free time, they no longer enjoyed discussing political affairs in the tea houses or secretly cursing the demon empress for harming the country. Instead, they returned home early and locked the doors to their courtyards, treating the storm outside as having nothing to do with them. The people of the capital had seen far too many things and heard far too many stories. Let alone the events of the 100 Herb Garden just 20 years ago, when the capital was embroiled in the bloody incident of the Orthodox Academy. Many people had personally witnessed an even bloodier sight. Whether it was a coup, a rebellion, a purge of the emperor's side, or a return to the throne, they had long since experienced it. These matters had nothing to do with them. They could just silently wait for the initial storm to dissipate. The weather the last few days was also exceptionally good. The clear autumn air was refreshing, the sun was high in the sky, and the leaves were drifting down. It was like nothing had happened in the last few days. Yet there were few pedestrians on the streets. The quiet capital was not quiet, only deathly stillness, because in the end, many things had happened. On the morning of the Tianhai Empress's death, a young Taoist, accompanied by the former Orthodox Academy's Shang Xingzhou, the Qin clan's prince, and countless ministers, entered the imperial palace from the mausoleum of books. Then, in the imperial court, he once more received the obeisance of the ministers and formally ascended to the throne. It was rumored that this was Crown Prince Zhaoming, who had escaped the palace. The first thing the new monarch did upon ascending to the throne was issue an edict. The edict had many words and was very complex. Not even the officials of the Bureau of Rights could remember all the details, but even the stupidest and most boorish person could make out a few basic meanings from the words of the edict. Everything the Tianhai Divine Empress had done in the last few years had been wrong. The people she had punished were all innocent, and then there were rewards, so naturally there were punishments. The rewards were all official positions of the imperial court. In any case, those officials loyal to the Tianhai Divine Empress were all imprisoned, as well as the glory of divine generals. In any case, those divine generals loyal to the Tianhai Divine Empress were either dead, heavily injured, or betrayed. As for punishment, it was even simpler, just the word kill. It was said that autumn wind and autumn rain were murderous. These few days had been a cold autumn. There was no bleak wind or miserable rain, but many people had been killed. After killing all those who needed to be killed, and those who needed to be killed, many people cast their gazes in one direction. Logically speaking, everyone's gazes should be on the imperial palace or the Li Palace, but they just had to look in that direction, with completely different moods. That was the Orthodox Academy. Very few people knew that on that early morning, Chun Changsheng had carried the Tianhai Divine Empress's body back to the Orthodox Academy. From that moment on, the gate of the Orthodox Academy was never opened again. Not even the fruits and vegetables that Clear Lake restaurant had braved the risk to deliver were delivered in. This was because the gate had never been opened, and also because the Orthodox Academy had already been surrounded. 2,000 black armored cavalry had surrounded the Orthodox Academy so tightly that not even a drop of water could trickle through. 100 Flowers Lane and the 100 Herb Garden were filled with cultivators. Only a very small number of people knew that the first thing the new sovereign did upon ascending to the throne was not to issue that edict to the world, but to issue a decree ordering that the Orthodox Academy be guarded, forbidding anyone from entering or leaving, and that violators would be executed without mercy. Somewhat subtly, the people responsible for guarding the Orthodox Academy were Tianhai Xingxue and the Prince of Yi County. The Prince of Yi County was the Prince of Xiang's younger brother from the same mother, and they had always had a close relationship. In the past, he had even killed an official sent to him by the imperial palace for the Prince of Xiang's sake. Tianhai Xingxue was the most outstanding descendant of the Tianhai clan's younger generation. He had an old grudge with the Orthodox Academy, but seemed to have been resolved. Crucially, why had the imperial palace sent the two of them to handle this matter together? The Tianhai Empress was already dead, so how could the complicated relationship between the Chun clan and the Tianhai clan continue? Those who knew the inside story maintained their silence. They gazed at the Orthodox Academy with very complicated gazes because the Tianhai Divine Empress's body was within. Those who did not know the inside story spiritedly discussed this matter in their own estates, their gazes towards the Orthodox Academy brimming with ridicule, sympathy, or perhaps delight in its misfortune. That night 3 days ago had truly been very long. It began with Chun Changsheng leaving the Orthodox Academy and beating Zhou Tong half to death in that crabapple tree courtyard in the alley of the Northern Military Department. Afterwards, he was sent back to the Orthodox Academy by the Orthodoxy and then brought to the peak of the Mausoleum of Books by the Divine Empress. Just when everyone believed that the Divine Empress would kill him, for some reason, the Empress released him. Finally, all the experts of the world gathered in the capital, and finally, the Divine Empress's soul returned to the Sea of Stars. In the span of a single night, so many world-shaking events had occurred. It was naturally easy for people to forget the details of these relatively unimportant events, but the entire world would never forget Shang Xingzhou's words. Chun Changsheng was not Crown Prince Xiaoming. He was not the Divine Empress's son. He was only a guise used to protect His Majesty, only bait used to weaken the Divine Empress. Now that the Divine Empress was dead and His Majesty had succeeded in ascending to the imperial throne, what use did he have? Without his background and identity, what use was there even if Chun Changsheng's talent and cultivation? Anyone could admit that he had displayed an extremely rare ability and courage in killing Zhou Tong, but if nothing unexpected happened, Lord Zhou Tong, who had played the most crucial role in this rebellion, would assuredly play an even more important role in the new structure of the imperial court. At that time, what would he do? Those powerful figures thought of the black-armored heavy cavalry surrounding the Orthodox Academy and believed that in a little while, a new and precise decree would descend. Chun Changsheng would lose everything he once possessed. The principal of the Orthodox Academy, the successor to the Pope, everything was just a river of stars in the Luo River. In the end, it was not real. As he gazed at the tightly shut gate of the Orthodox Academy, he thought of the mocking smile on his father's lips over the last 2 nights, thought of Tian Haiyuer's clansmen taking pleasure in his misfortune. 2 unnatural blushes appeared on Tian Hai Shengxue's pale face. He said, "The matter has just ended and you want to throw him away? Are you really using him like a rag?" The Prince of Yi County knew that he was speaking of Chun Changsheng and jeered, "I don't even know where this bastard came from." Just because his luck was good, he was able to pick the venerable Principal Shang to be His Majesty's substitute. After entering the capital, he stirred up so much trouble, but a chess piece is still a chess piece. Does he really want to continue holding on to those things that he has no right to hold on to? Chapter 670. Whether it was the princes of the Chang clan or those important personages who had taken the enormous risk to betray the Tianhai Divine Empress, they actually all had to thank Chun Changsheng. If not for Chun Changsheng, the Tianhai Divine Empress would not have become so weak in order to defy the heavens and change his fate. Then no matter how perfect the plan Shang Xingzhou and them had devised, it would have been impossible to invite the Tianhai Divine Empress down from her divine altar. Whether it was intentional or not, Chun Changsheng played a decisive role in their plan, but they wouldn't remember this. Similarly, whether it was intentional or not, the words of the Duke of Hejun were the current attitude of the world towards Chun Changsheng. Tianhai Xingxue was well aware of this. He sneered, "If he wasn't a descendant of your Chun clan, Would the divine empress have mistaken him for someone else? Bastard? His Highness's words were ridiculous. Princey was slightly taken aback when he heard this, and his expression quickly turned ugly. This was because he realized that this might be the truth. At this moment, the cavalry parted like a tide. An extremely old eunuch sat on a soft carriage and walked over. Looking at the old eunuch, the Prince of He County slightly raised his brows. Turning to Tianhai Xingxue, he sneered, "It seems that His Majesty does not think like you." The old eunuch had come to deliver the imperial edict. However, after the accompanying officials announced their purpose, the gate of the Orthodox Academy remained tightly shut, not opening for a long time. "It looks like His Majesty sent us to surround the Tradition Academy, but from another perspective, isn't it because the Tradition Academy doesn't want to open its doors?" Tianhai Xingxue laughed, not concealing his joy. "Nephew, don't celebrate too early." The Prince of Yijun sneered and said, "It is said that Qin Changsheng and His Majesty are schoolmates, but if he offends this eunuch, I'm afraid that any friendship will be useless." Tianhai Xingshue's expression sank slightly. "Your Highness, I don't understand what you're saying." Princey sneered and said, "Eunuch Xiu used to be Imperial Father's foster brother and volunteered to enter the palace to serve Imperial Father. He was highly principled and was greatly respected. Even when Imperial Mother was in power, no matter how much she disliked him, she could only have him retire and have him return to Zhang province to recuperate. Now that he's been invited back by Headmaster Shang to take over the position of Palace Eunuch of the Palm Seal, I'd like to see who dares to give him a hard time." The old eunuch had been lying on the soft carriage the entire time, his eyes closed. Tianhai Xingxue had previously found it rather strange. Since he was a eunuch who had come to deliver the decree and had personally witnessed the tense atmosphere in front of the Orthodox Academy, how could he dare to put on such an act? Only now did he realize that it was actually the incredible eunuch Lin who had returned. He subconsciously thought that eunuch Lin should be like this, and he couldn't help but look at him with curiosity and respect for this legendary figure. But soon after, he recalled that just yesterday, those eunuchs and maids loyal to the divine empress in the imperial palace, including the chief eunuch he had known since childhood, had all died. This caused death. His Chen Wang Chen Yu Emperor Li Shi Wang Emperor, the Emperor Chen Li and Wang. After some time, the old eunuch slowly opened his eyes. Gazing at the still, tightly shut gate of the Orthodox Academy, he expressionlessly said, "If you don't open it, I'll smash it." When this old eunuch closed his eyes, he looked like a very ordinary person. But when he opened his eyes, his body naturally released a fierce aura, like an iron spear that had broken free from an old cloth. Wherever his gaze landed, wherever his words fell, there would be a sharp edge appearing. Growing up in the imperial palace and cultivating in countless profound secret manuals, eunuch Lin's cultivation was naturally extremely high. However, this fierce spear energy did not originate from his strength. That ever-present edge mostly came from his heart, as well as the eyes that appeared from his heart. Those two eyes that had become somewhat turbid due to the passage of time were brimming with resolve and righteousness, devoid of the slightest wavering or lack of confidence. Shang Xingzhou had invited eunuch Lin to return to the imperial palace to take over the Palm Seal. This in itself signified a change of dynasty, the return of justice. He had come from the imperial palace and held an imperial decree in his hand. His words represented the will of the entire great Zhou imperial court. Who would dare oppose him now? Yet even after hearing his words, the area outside the Orthodox Academy remained quiet. No one came to smash the gate, not a single person. Whether it was the black-armored heavy cavalry, the soldiers of the city gate department, or even the guards that had escorted eunuch Lin, they all remained where they were. Many people's gazes fell, whether intentionally or not, on Tianhai Shengshua's body. In that morning rain in the spring of the year before last, it was this proud son of the Tianhai clan who had returned from Snow Old Pass and brought his clan's generals to destroy the gate of the Orthodox Academy. On that day, many people died in the capital. For the first time, the Orthodox Academy displayed its background, resources, and strength surpassing everyone's expectations and obtaining the ultimate victory. But the Orthodox Academy did not repair the gate. Instead, it allowed the ruined gate to endure in the wind and rain for a very long time, even becoming a new landscape of the capital. Only much later, when Shun Changsheng obtained first rank of the first banner in the grand examination, did the Tianhai clan admit their wrongs and repair an incomparably magnificent gate for the Orthodox Academy. This new gate was proof of the Orthodox Academy's strength and also a humiliation that the Tianhai clan could not wash away. From that point on, everyone in the capital knew one thing. The gate of the Orthodox Academy was not so easy to smash. If one wanted to smash it, one would die. One would die of humiliation. I've lived in the countryside for so long that I didn't know that the capital had been so lively these past 2 years. After hearing the whispered explanation of his attendant eunuch, Eunuch Lin turned to the distant Tianhai Shengxue and beckoned him over. Tianhai Shengxue walked over. Eunuch Lin calmly gazed at him for a very long time, then said, "When you were born, I was still in the capital. At the time, I said to your father that the Tianhai clan was made up of a bunch of idiotic trash. Only your mother was a decent wife, and I hoped that she would be able to teach a decent child. Now, it seems that these words were not wrong." Tianhai Xingxue knew of these past events and sincerely replied, "Eunuch Lin praises me too much." Eunuch Lin did not bring up the past again, asking, "I heard that you once suffered humiliation here." Tianhai Xingxue gazed at the tightly shut gate of the Orthodox Academy and said, "That was Junior asking for humiliation." Eunuch Lin was rather surprised by these 4 words. He calmly looked at him and said, "In that case, you are not intending to take it back yourself?" Taking back the humiliation he had once suffered was not asking for humiliation, but an open and honorable vengeance. For instance, he could smash down the gate of the Orthodox Academy once more. Tianhai Xingxue used his silence to express his intentions. Eunuch Lin smirked at him and said, "Could it be that the people of the Tianhai clan are all like you, their hearts not firm?" These words made Tianhai Xingxue feel his body go somewhat cold. It must be known that the current situation was sensitive and tense. Just the words "heart not firm" might bring the Tianhai clan a great deal of trouble. Yet his heart was sufficiently firm, so he had rejected Eunuch Lin's clearly kind proposal. How could he go back on his word now? Eunuch Lin said before that my mother was not bad, and I'm also a good child, so I think that I should at least show some reason. Tianhai Xingxue took in a deep breath, his words as cold as ice. Moreover, Eunuch Lin's previous words were inappropriate in the first place. Principal Chun has performed a great service for the human race and is also the future pope. Let alone an imperial decree. Even if His Majesty personally came, presumably he would not be too forceful, much less destroy the Academy gate. Is that so? Eunuch Lin suddenly laughed. In the next moment, his laughter vanished, and his expression became even colder than Tianhai Xingxue's, seeming extremely unyielding. Cupping his hands to the sky, he said, "Taizu's descendants have finally regained the world, and the entire world is celebrating, but now the Orthodox Academy actually dares to defy the decree. This is truly incomprehensible. Could it be that all of this is fake? If you don't even dare to destroy a single Academy gate, how can you talk about ruling the world?" These words were very heavy, very frightening. Without waiting for Tianhai Xingxue to respond, the Prince of He County came to his senses. Clenching his teeth, he lashed his whip at the back of his trusted general and yelled, "Hurry up and blow open the Academy gate." With this order, those silent guards and soldiers of the city gate department finally began to move, preparing to clear the area. Several hundred black-armored cavalry began to charge, their heavy armor covering the bodies of cavalry and war horses gleaming with a cold light. It exuded an almost suffocating pressure. No matter how beautiful the Orthodox Academy's gate was, no matter how sturdy, it would still be crushed to pieces by the iron stream of the black-armored cavalry. When that happened, just what sort of fate would await the people within the Orthodox Academy? Chapter 671. The gate of the Orthodox Academy had always been tightly shut, not a single sound coming from within. Whether it was the encirclement of the imperial court's soldiers or the arrival of the old eunuch with the imperial decree, nothing had changed. It had always been quiet. Anyone who looked at the thick gate would believe that there was no one behind it. In reality, there had always been someone behind the gate. Behind the gate were 2 boxwood trees. Now that autumn had come, their leaves had become much sparse. The cold and clear sunlight pierced through the branches and fell upon the face of a young girl. This girl had a clear and beautiful appearance, still carrying a hint of childishness. She was extremely young, and in the light of the sun, she seemed even more charming. However, the worry and exhaustion on her face also became much clearer. Yi Xiaoyan, an inner sect disciple of South Stream Temple. Sumoyu stood at her side. Several dozen disciples of South Stream Temple stood behind the pair. Their swords had been drawn long ago. The autumn light could fall upon their faces, but it could not fall upon their swords, because those swords were too sharp. Their sword glows too bright. They had been guarding the gate of the Orthodox Academy this entire time. The sword array of South Stream Temple had already guarded this place for 3 days and 3 nights. The female disciples of South Stream Temple were already very tired. When they heard the faint sound from outside the courtyard, they slightly paled. The black-armored heavy cavalry of the Great Zhou were unparalleled in the world. If they charged like this, not even the sword array of South Stream Temple would be able to withstand it. What do we do? Yi Xiaoyan turned to Su Moyu, her clear and beautiful face filled with anxiety. Su Moyu turned his head in the direction of the library, thinking of that fellow who had remained silent ever since his return from the Mausoleum of Books, unable to make up his mind. That's Eunuch Lin. Where are all of you still thinking? Hurry up and open the gate to receive the decree. A student of the Orthodox Academy looked at the people in front of the gate and shouted in fear, "Could it be that all of you are really prepared to defy the decree? I don't want to accompany all of you in death." This person's words caused a slight disturbance among the teachers and students of the Orthodox Academy. The sounds of discussion gradually rose, and some people even began to fiercely quarrel. Sumoyu looked at this student and recalled that he was the son of a wealthy merchant from Hunan Road. He silently committed his name to memory. Yi Xiaoyan saw his gaze and thought that he was wavering. She turned to the teachers and students of the Orthodox Academy and sternly shouted, "The Holy Maiden has decreed that the disciples of South Stream Temple will definitely protect Principal Chen's safety. If there are people who are greedy for life and afraid of death, just leave through the back door. Don't talk nonsense here, otherwise don't blame the temple sword for being merciless." Hearing this, the face of a rich student from Hunan Road changed. He was very angry, but he didn't dare to say anything more and walked away from the crowd. Soon after, some students of the Orthodox Academy and several teachers also left the crowd, all heading towards the back gate. At this sight, the teachers and students left on the field couldn't help but curse. When they saw the gazes of the South Stream Temple disciples, they felt even more ashamed. Su you didn't say anything, only remembering the names of those who had left. Only now did Yi Xiaoyan realize that his silence did not mean that he was wavering. Somewhat confused, she asked, "What are you thinking about?" Sumoyu calmly replied, "I was thinking, if the Orthodox Academy can be saved, what method should I use to retaliate against these people?" Yi Xiaoyan froze, thinking, when did the Sumoyu of the Li Palace Academy, famed for his politeness and modesty, change his personality? She didn't say it, but Sumoyu knew what she was thinking. He gazed at the beautiful autumn scenery of the Orthodox Academy, a nostalgic expression appearing on his face. This is an interesting place. Anyone who stays here for a long time will experience some change. If this interesting Orthodox Academy could be saved, it would naturally be very good, but it had always been a most unreliable word. Otherwise, why would he have begun to feel sorrow and nostalgia ahead of time? 100 Flowers Lane had already been cleared out, and the building on the other side of the lane had even been forcefully flattened, leaving only that tea house. In the gradually rising dust, that tea house that had once watched several dozen all-school martial exhibitions seemed very lonely, and the figures of those several hundred black-armored heavy cavalry were even more frightening. The gate of the Orthodox Academy was still tightly shut. To actually have such courage, truly worthy of being the Orthodox Academy that Principal Shang single-handedly created, worthy of being His Majesty's junior brother. Eunuch Lin suddenly smiled, his smile brimming with emotion. The old man's voice was rather muffled and soft. Other than the young attendant at the front, no one else could hear it. However, the next sentence was heard by everyone present. Eunuch Lin gazed at the tightly shut gate of the Orthodox Academy, his smile fading as he slowly said, "Principal Chun is a loner, but the teachers and students of the Orthodox Academy all have families." At these words, a voice finally came from within the Orthodox Academy, and the streets were similarly thrown into an uproar. Countless gazes turned to this elderly eunuch of the Palm Seal sect. Tianhai Shengshua's complexion paled even more. He had never imagined that this eunuch Lin was completely different from the upright and unswerving character he was rumored to be. He had actually used such unyielding and despicable methods. It was hard to say if they had heard wrong. A voice seemed to rise from the depths of the Orthodox Academy. Then, the main gate of the Orthodox Academy, which had not been opened for 3 days and 3 nights, slowly opened. What greeted them was an oppressive sword glow and 200-some teachers and students of the Orthodox Academy. Even though they knew they were no match, they still maintained a strict formation and waited. At this sight, both the Prince of County and the black-armored heavy cavalry subtly paled. Eunuch Lin was very calm, even giving off the feeling that he was somewhat gratified. Sumoyu had not slept for the past 3 days and was very tired, but his eyes and voice were both clear and bright. He stood on the stone steps and said to Eunuch Lin, "One person is enough to announce the edict." The imperial edict had arrived, but the Orthodox Academy had not opened its gate wide, set up incense burners, kneeled, and even allowed only Eunuch Lin to enter. This attitude was still extremely disrespectful. Eunuch Lin was not angry. Smiling, he said, "If you want to kill him, a single edict and me alone are enough." After saying this, he walked into the Orthodox Academy. As he brushed past Su Moyu, he lightly patted him on the shoulder. Yi Xiaoyan's expression instantly turned cold, her hand gripping the hilt of her sword tightening. Nothing happened. Su Moyu did not vomit blood and collapse to the ground. Eunuch Lin only wanted to express his admiration and regard for Su Moyu. In this major event, Wu Qiongbai and Bi Yanghong, 2 experts of the divine domain, especially the latter, had performed a great service. Su Moyu was Bi Yanghong's nephew, but he had remained in the Orthodox Academy after the event. In the eyes of the common people, this was very foolish, but in the eyes of Eunuch Lin, who had lived his entire life as a fool, this was very extraordinary. The door to the library was open. The sunlight fell upon the glossy black floorboards, shining so brightly that one could see one's reflection. Chen Changshang sat by the window, not looking at the autumn colors outside. His head was lowered, his thoughts inscrutable. Eunuch Lin calmly gazed at him for a very long time. Chen Changshang did not move, did not speak, only lowered his head. Eunuch Lin suddenly understood. He was looking at his reflection on the floorboards. Chen Changsheng was looking at himself. Chapter 672. The clear light of autumn shone through the library, and it was very quiet. Suddenly, a voice rang out. This voice was very old, very calm, very elegant, unruffled, and very convincing. Eunuch Lin replied, "I know what you're thinking. You think that His Majesty was coerced by us treacherous officials. So he issued that decree 3 days ago, had people surround the Orthodox Academy and prevent the people inside from leaving. But you're wrong. That decree truly was drawn up by His Majesty himself, because he wanted to protect you." As he spoke, he kept his eyes on the young man by the window, or perhaps it was better to say that he stared at him as if he wanted to see through him. However, the young man did not react. No matter what he heard, his head remained lowered and he remained silent. How could there be no reaction? Whether it was gratitude, disbelief, ridicule, anger, or something else after hearing these words, there should have been some change in his emotions, right? The library was still quiet. Perhaps it was precisely for this reason that Eunuch Lin said nothing more, nor did he announce the decree. He allowed the silence to continue. After some time, the young man finally raised his head and gazed out the window at the clear and cold autumn scenery. 3 days had passed since the great battle in the Mausoleum of Books. His face was still pale, and he was clearly much thinner, but his expression was still very calm. There was no sorrow or anger on his face, no frustration or helplessness. There was only calmness. His clear and young features, because of this pensive look, had become even more composed. It was not the mature youth that the common people had judged him to be, but true maturity. In a single night, one had experienced so many things, passed through life and death, seen so many ugly and magnificent sights. Anyone would have matured, right? As he thought of these things, Eunuch Lin couldn't help but look at the young man with a hint of pity. The bright yellow imperial decree had already been taken out of his sleeve. He did not open it, but tightly gripped it like a Tao spear. You know why I came to the Orthodox Academy today? Eunuch Lin was quiet for a very long time. Then he said, I want to take the Empress's body away. The library was still quiet. The autumn wind blew in through the window, wantonly blowing back and forth between the bookshelves and the floorboards. And then, Chen Changxing asked. For 3 days and 3 nights, he hadn't eaten, drank, or opened his mouth. He spoke very slowly, and his voice was very dry, like a desert that had been exposed to the sun for 3 autumns. You finally spoke. Eunuch Lin looked at him and said, his voice filled with emotion. Chun Chang shook his head and said, I've already spoken before. If I didn't speak, how could you enter this place? As he said this, he was still looking out the window. Outside the window was the grassland that was turning yellow, the slightly cold autumn lake, and the big banyan tree by the lake. His voice was very calm, seemingly devoid of any emotion. His expression was very serious, without any hint of mockery, because this was just a very calm and objective explanation. However, Eunuch Lin was somewhat unable to adapt. He felt like his chest was being stifled. This was a fact. Although somewhat meaningless, it was still a fact. It was he who had Su Moyu open the gate to the Orthodox Academy. It had nothing to do with Eunuch Lin, nor did it have much to do with the imperial edict. It was just that he wanted to speak. Just like that youth in the plum garden and had said 3 years ago, Chun Changsheng and Su Yurong were both very difficult to speak to. The room returned to silence, until Eunuch Lin spoke again. Yes, but in the end, you still opened your mouth to speak. He looked at Chun Changsheng and said, just like how not everyone will live and die with the Orthodox Academy in the end. The Orthodox Academy is not Star Caesar Academy. It doesn't have overly strict rules, nor does it have any moral standards. This is just a place of study, so what right does it have to demand these things? Chun Changsheng felt no hatred towards those teachers and students that had left the Orthodox Academy, nor did he feel the need to explain things to this old eunuch. And then, he asked as he looked out the window at the autumn scenery. This was a repetition and also a reinforcement. More importantly, this was the answer he wanted to know. Once the divine Empress Phoenix body is taken back, it will naturally be a grand funeral. No, it will naturally be a state funeral. Eunuch Lin expressionlessly said, although in my view, the demon Empress bones should be ground to dust and thrown into a stinking ditch, she is still Emperor Xian's first wife, His Majesty's birth mother. With her status, there is no need for you to worry about these problems. Chun Changsheng continued to calmly look out the window at the autumn scenery. I've already buried her. The library fell silent once more. For a very long time, not a single sound could be heard. Since she had already been buried, there was naturally a tomb. If there was a tomb, it naturally could not be excavated. Even an imperial edict would be meaningless, because there was a moral code, and the deceased was the most important. Since the tombs in the Garden of Zhou can be opened, there is no tomb that cannot be opened. Eunuch Lin slightly narrowed his eyes and said to him, perhaps you could directly tell me where her tomb is. She was buried in the depths of the 100 Herb Garden. Chun Changsheng silently thought, not answering. In the past few years, he had met the Tianhai Divine Empress several times, and they had all been in the 100 Her Garden. He had never asked the Divine Empress why she liked to drink tea in the 100 Her Garden, or what that small stone table, that metal teapot, and that black tea and white tea meant to her. But in the 100 Herb Garden, she had touched his face, seen his eyes, and he had seen reminiscence in them. He knew that she liked this place the most, because this was where she had spent the most beautiful period of her life. Thus, he had buried her in the 100 Her Garden. Principal Chun, are you going to defy the decree? Eunuch Lin's eyes narrowed even more, revealing a sharp edge, his tone abnormally unyielding. This was the first time he had used the title of principal to refer to Chen Changsheng. It was very solemn, his expression abnormally earnest. Chen Changsheng looked out the window at the autumn scenery, saying nothing. Only now did he realize that an autumn without rain was actually not very interesting. Without rain falling on the red or yellow leaves, the dust rising from the courtyard walls scattered the sunlight. It was no longer clear and beautiful, but rather sticky and unpleasant. He did not like this sort of autumn. Whether it was Zhu Luo or Guan Xinke, after death, they both turned into dust and streams of light, returning to the sea of stars, not leaving a single trace in the human world. The Empress's cultivation far surpassed these two storms. If she was willing, she could have turned into a speck of star dust on the verge of death, but she did not. Do you understand why? Eunuch Lin entered the building and stood on the pitch-black yet bright floor. The high threshold was right behind him. He looked at Chen Changsheng and continued, because the Empress knew that you valued your emotions and knew that you would assuredly take her remains and leave. Thus, she left behind so many troubles. As he spoke, his tone became rather solemn, heavy, and his expression very solemn and serious. Chen Changsheng understood what he meant, knew that the vast majority of people in the world also thought this way, but he did not believe it. For a person like the Tianhai Divine Empress, before returning to the Sea of Stars, how could she be in the mood to care about these minor matters? Alas, no one would believe this. The Demon Empress died on the peak of the Mausoleum of Books. You have performed a meritorious service, let alone the fact that you are His Majesty's junior brother. Eunuch Lin's voice grew harsher and harsher, but everyone saw that she saved you on the peak of the Mausoleum of Books, and they also saw that you carried her away. Chen Changsheng continued to look out the window at the autumn scenery, saying nothing. Eunuch Lin continued, in the eyes of others, you are currently nothing. Ignoring you or killing you are both very simple matters. Even Principal Shang believes that keeping you alive is useless, but I do not believe this. So today, I came to the Orthodox Academy to issue a decree because I want to give you a chance. Chen Changsheng blinked his eyes as if he wanted to completely crush the autumn outside the window. Chapter 673. What opportunity? Give up on those meaningless, empty attachments. Don't give people a reason to kill you. Thus, you can continue to stay in the Orthodox Academy, in the capital, and help His Majesty. I don't understand. That night, the Demon Empress was right. Those princes are not to be trifled with, and the Tianhai clan will not always be obedient. Whether or not His Majesty will be able to sit firmly on the throne will always be a problem. Could it be that you don't believe me? Dean Shang's loyalty doesn't need to be proven, but I don't mind His Majesty receiving more help. Chen Changsheng roughly understood Eunuch Lin's meaning. Perhaps this really was a chance for him and the Orthodox Academy, but he said nothing. Eunuch Lin said, accept the decree. Hand over Tianhai's body, express your stance to the entire world, and remain at His Majesty's side. Chen Changsheng was silent for a long time and said, why should I do this? Eunuch Lin replied, because His Majesty requires your assistance. Chen Changsheng was silent for a long time and said, why should I help him? Eunuch Lin's expression gradually grew cold. Only by doing this can I not betray the feelings of schoolmates, the righteousness of ruler and minister. Of course, we are classmates. Chen Changsheng stood up and placed his right hand on the windowsill. Looking at the increasingly desolate autumn scenery outside the window, he said somewhat dully, "But what is the relationship between a ruler and a minister?" Eunuch Lin harshly said to him, "As a subject of the great Zhou, do you dare not consider yourself a subject? Even if I am willing to be a subject, does senior brother also want to be a monarch?" He shook his head and said, "Moreover, my senior martial brother only knows how to treat people. How could he know how to govern a country?" Eunuch Lin seemed to understand something. His voice became abnormally cold as he looked at Chun Changsheng and said, "The demon empress is not your mother. You're just a chess piece. It would be best if you could be a little more clear-headed. Do not think that just because she saved you on the peak of the mausoleum of books, you have deep feelings for you, that you should guard her grave out of filial piety." Chun Changsheng said, "On the chessboard, the pieces are divided into black and red. If I am the emperor's chess piece, how can I become your chess piece?" Everyone knew that he was a pawn, or perhaps a fruit, that the anti-Heavenly Sea faction had painstakingly cultivated many years ago. Although the Tianhai Divine Empress had not killed him, nor had she eaten him, this fruit of his had still succeeded in sending poison into her body. This was probably the so-called fate, or perhaps the so-called heavenly Tao. It was hard to fathom, and until now, no one had been able to overcome it. Since he was his master's chess piece, then he was naturally not the Divine Empress's chess piece, so there was no need to investigate too much. It took him 3 days to figure this out. So you think she's a good person, and you're sad for her departure, so you don't want to accept the edict? Or do you feel that in these 3 days, too many people have died in Jingdo, violating your principles? Don't forget, she has never been a virtuous and benevolent woman. If she had won this time, more people would have died in Jingdo. Eunuch Lin said solemnly, "The Divine Empress is naturally not a good person. On the peak of the mausoleum of books, she saved me, but in that moment, she wanted to save me." Chun Changsheng's gaze that was looking out of the window gradually moved upwards and landed on the faintly discernible hill in the distance. After a moment of silence, he continued, "I won't lie to myself. That represents the love between mother and son, or perhaps it's some great kindness. But in the end, she saved me, and at that moment, I could feel that her kindness was real." As he spoke, he was calm and desolate. It was very rare to see these two emotions appear at the same time from a young person. After a very long time, he drew back his gaze and lowered his head. "Sir should be well aware that I will no longer trust anyone. Anyone who had gone through what he had gone through would never have any trust in this world. You can trust me, just like many people," Eunuch Lin said as he gazed at his back. In Xining Village, Chun Changsheng naturally did not know of the rumors about this old eunuch, but after coming to the capital, no matter how much he lived in seclusion, he had still heard stories about him. In the eyes of the common people, Eunuch Lin was a hero who valued friendship and righteousness, a peerless and loyal scholar of the state, a gentleman who could not be bullied. Back then, Emperor Taizong had never been able to choose a successor, and the imperial palace was fraught with danger. As Emperor Xian's milk brother, he resolutely castrated himself and entered the palace as a eunuch precisely to protect Emperor Xian's safety. Later on, Emperor Xian became gravely ill and the Divine Empress reigned. For the benefit of the great Zhou dynasty and the common people, he endured this humiliation, living in the palace until Emperor Xian passed away. Eunuch Lin had done many such things in the past. His life was a legend, close to perfection. Today, he brought an imperial decree to the Orthodox Academy. For the great Zhou dynasty, for the common people, for His Majesty, he wanted to subdue Chun Changsheng. If he wanted to subdue Chun Changsheng, Eunuch Lin first had to convince Chun Changsheng that there were always some things in this world that were worth trusting and worth fighting for. Like the continuation of the great Zhou dynasty for 1,000 years, like the bright future of the human race, like the supreme glory of the Chun imperial clan, like His Majesty's imperial throne. It was very quiet in the library. "I don't trust you." Without any consideration or hesitation, Chun Changsheng's answer was very direct and very firm. The so-called righteousness and loyalty seemed to have no effect on him. Eunuch Lin narrowed his eyes and asked why. Chun Chong Sheng replied, "Because before, you used the lives of our loved ones to threaten us." Eunuch Lin expressionlessly said, "I used the lives of their loved ones to push open the gate of the Orthodox Academy. There was no slaughter, no death. Is this not the best result?" Chun Chong Sheng asked, "In order to achieve your goal, the process and the means are all that matters. Yes, as long as in this process, you do not forget your original intentions." With a proud expression, Eunuch Lin said, "I used my entire life to prove that I did it." Chun Chong Sheng said nothing more. He asked, "If I insist on not accepting the decree, what will happen?" Before I left the Li Palace, Principal Shang said to me that this academy is too small. If it is destroyed, rebuilding it shouldn't be too difficult. Eunuch Lin's voice became rather ethereal, like the music of an immortal, like the weeping of a ghost from the netherworld. "So this was your original intentions?" Chun Chong Sheng was quiet for a while, then said, "I am very regretful that a friend of mine left." Eunuch Lin asked, "Even if that friend of yours was here, what could he have changed?" Chun Chong Sheng shook his head and said, "He naturally couldn't have changed anything, but I am not good at speaking. If he was here, perhaps he could have helped me speak clearly." Eunuch Lin asked, "If that friend of yours were here, what would he have said?" Chun Chong Sheng was quiet for a very long time, imagining what that fellow would have said if he were in this situation. After a while, he turned around and looked into Eunuch Lin's eyes. "All these years, the Qin family's princes have been tyrannical and cruel in the prefectures, harming the common people. Have you ever said anything? The divine empress used Zhou Tong, Cheng Jun, and other treacherous officials, so naturally they are not good people. Now, you are also using Zhou Tong and will even use him. Then, what kind of good people can you all be?" That year, in order to satisfy your false pleasure of martyrdom, you castrated yourself and entered the palace. Have you ever thought about what your parents were thinking? What does His Majesty think? Eunuch Lin's expression suddenly turned stern as he shouted, "His Majesty," and, not waiting for him to finish, Chun Chong Sheng continued, "His Majesty and you are like brothers, yet you're only willing to call yourself an official or a servant, making His Majesty even more lonely and sad. Where is the brotherhood?" Eunuch Lin flew into a rage and shouted, "We were originally ruler and minister, naturally ruler and minister." Chun Chong Sheng still didn't let him finish his words and continued calmly and firmly, "I don't care how you view your relationship with the late emperor, but it is definitely not the relationship between me and senior brother. Senior brother definitely doesn't want to be a ruler, so I naturally can't be a subject. Moreover, I am the future pope, not a subject." Eunuch Lin was so angry that he actually laughed. Jeering, he said, "You still think that you are the future pope? Truly laughable. If that friend of mine were still here, he would definitely say, 'This is not a matter that you have the right to ask. Who do you think you are?'" Chun Chong Sheng's voice was still calm, devoid of any derision. It was like a mechanical repetition, or perhaps an imitation, including when he spoke of the right, and what did he mean. He was learning from his friend's style of speech. This style of speech, when combined with the complete opposite of calmness, possessed an unimaginable killing power. It was still as his friend had said 3 years ago in the Plum Garden Inn. Eunuch Lin's breathing became somewhat heavy. In the present world, there were far too many people who breathed in admiration. The black-armored heavy cavalry outside the Orthodox Academy prepared to charge, and the heavily armored war horses also began to breathe heavily. In the next moment, perhaps out of rage, Eunuch Lin became much quieter. He looked at Chun Chong Sheng expressionlessly and said, "I value you because of your position in the orthodoxy and the little reputation you've earned in the past 3 years, but not because of you. Do you think that with just you children, you can reverse the trend of the human world and resist the raging waves of the heavenly Tao? No, only many innocent people will die because of your foolish decision." Chun Chong Sheng replied, "And the blood of those innocent people will not stain your hands. You will always be clean, right?" Eunuch Lin proudly replied, "That is because I have a righteous cause in my hands." Chen Changsheng recalled the Ivy Festival 3 years ago. Those people who, for the sake of righteousness, had asked Su Yorong to marry Qiushan Jun and had asked him to annul his engagement. He said, "I was wrong." Eunuch Lin indifferently said, "It's too late to know your wrongs." Chen Changsheng shook his head. "I'm saying that if that friend of mine were here, he wouldn't have said as much as I did just now." Eunuch Lin arched his brows. "Is that so?" Chen Changsheng replied. "He would probably only say 4 words." Eunuch Lin's pupils constricted. "What 4 words?" Chen Changsheng replied. "Fuck off." Chapter 674. When Chen Changsheng said these 4 words, the proclamation naturally could not continue. Eunuch Lin calmly gazed at him and asked, "You think that I don't dare to kill you?" Chen Changsheng replied, "On the 3rd day of a new sovereign's ascension to the throne, sending someone to kill the future pope will go down in the annals of history." Eunuch Lin calmly gazed at him and calmly said, "You are His Majesty's beloved junior brother, and you also have many supporters in the orthodoxy. Just as you said, if I really did kill you, His Majesty would grieve and the capital would fall into chaos. In order to pacify the situation, in order to give history an explanation, presumably, I would also be ordered to die." Chen Changsheng replied, "But you would still kill me." Eunuch Lin indifferently said, "Because you have already expressed your stance. I can sense the danger you pose. So since you are not willing to become a subject, you can only die. His Majesty ascended to the throne and needs to intimidate the world. Anyone who harbors thoughts about the demon empress must die, no matter who it is. As for my own end, it is not important, because I am a foolishly loyal person. Foolishness does not mean that you have the authority to be unreasonable, and it certainly does not mean that you need to be respected." Chen Changsheng turned around by the window. The clear and cold autumn light fell on his academy uniform, very similar to the starlight. He unsheathed his sword and placed it in its sheath. His hand was very steady, as was his breathing, and so was his voice. "Is my master in Li Palace right now?" Eunuch Lin slightly creased his brow. He had not expected Chen Changsheng to still be able to maintain a clear mind. "Have you ever wondered why he did not kill me 3 days ago in the Mausoleum of Books, and why he still has not come to the Orthodox Academy to see me?" Chen Changsheng looked at Eunuch Lin and said, "Because he does not dare to see me, and he cannot be sure that he can silently kill me. He was raised by me. If I say that I want him dead, then he should obediently die. This is his duty." In the most secluded palace hall of the Li Palace, a voice as clear and cold as autumn echoed. "If this is his duty, senior brother, why do you not dare to see him in the Orthodox Academy?" The Pope's voice also rang out. "Why do I not dare to see him? I just don't want him to say something inappropriate when he sees me because of those stupid things and make me angry." Shang Xingzhou was no longer as ordinary as he had been in the past 20 years. He was still wearing his Taoist robe, but no one would treat him as an ordinary middle-aged Taoist. He had a head full of black hair, a hint of frost occasionally visible at his temples. His face was handsome, his skin as tender and smooth as a newborn's, his expression calm and indifferent, his elegance making one's heart palpitate. He was clearly older than the Pope, but he still looked incomparably young, his body seemingly brimming with boundless energy. The Pope looked at him and calmly said, "Is that so? Then why did senior brother come to see me? Aren't you afraid that I'll say something inappropriate and make you angry?" Shang Xingzhou said, "I came to see you because I want to discuss the inheritance of my sect." The Pope asked, "That staff?" "That's right," Shang Xingzhou said. The Pope confirmed his meaning. After a moment of silence, he asked, "Why?" Shang Xingzhou calmly replied, "Tianhai is already dead. What use is there in keeping him?" The Pope slowly shook his head. As a child, he was well-versed in the 3,000 Taoist canons. His talent in cultivation is superb, and his conduct is impeccable. Shang Xingzhou calmly gazed at him and said, "Junior brother, you should be well aware that the inheritance of the orthodoxy has never had anything to do with talent, or else how could it have been your turn to succeed the throne? The most important consideration in the inheritance of the orthodoxy was how to ensure that the orthodoxy continued to exist for thousands of generations. It truly had nothing to do with the talent of the candidate, only with profit. Back then, when the Li Palace was choosing the next pope, Shang Xingzhou, who was slightly stronger in cultivation and far superior in both methods and willpower, withdrew from the competition precisely because of this consideration. It was so 1,000 years ago, so how could it be any different now? Thinking of the past, the Pope fell silent for a very long time. Suddenly, he said, his bloodline clearly comes from the descendants of the deceased. Since talent and Tao heart were not being discussed, only profit was being discussed, and this was the focus. Correct. I once promised that monk that as long as I succeeded, Chen Changshen would become the representative of the deceased and succeed as Pope, and they would give up on the struggle for the imperial throne. Shang Xingzhou expressionlessly continued. But on that night, Tianhai shattered his will and destroyed the path that the deceased had used several hundred years to open. Even if they obtained the true legacy of the sacred light continent, they would still need several decades to break through the crystal wall again. This being the case, why should I fulfill my promise and make that useless little fellow pope? The pope's expression did not change at these words. He indifferently asked, "Then who do you want to make pope?" Shang Xingzhou said nothing, only clapped his hands. The clear and resounding applause echoed through the quiet and secluded hall. After a moment, with extremely light footsteps, a young girl walked in from outside the hall. On that night, this young girl had appeared in front of the mausoleum of books. She was born very delicate, very charming, very cute, but her face was brimming with an air of nobility and pride that could not be concealed. Mu Jiushi, one of the young and mysterious 6 prefects of the orthodoxy. Even the Tianhai divine empress treated her differently. The pope did not seem surprised by her appearance. He asked, "You are sure that you must be pope?" Mu Jiushi smiled. "I'm a very cool-headed person. I do not have the confidence to compete with Su Yorong for a favorable impression in the hearts of the Southerners, so I will not go to South Stream Temple to become holy maiden." Her smile was free and easy, her words proud and domineering. "But Chen Changsheng is nothing at all, so why should I make him pope?" The pope smiled at her, saying nothing. Mu Jiushi's smile deepened. It was not a smile that a young girl of her age should have. Her words also deepened, like words carved into wood. They were definitely not words that should be spoken to the pope. Did His Holiness not say that he was about to die? She smiled at the pope. "Even if His Holiness does not want me to be pope now, there is no way to stop me after I die. It is better to be straightforward now. In the future, when I become pope, I will remember His Holiness's kindness and will naturally leave Chen Changsheng a path to life." On that night, in front of the mausoleum of books, the Tianhai divine empress had asked the pope the reason, and the pope had given a very clear reason. He was old and about to die. This should have been the truth, but Mu Jiushi's words were no longer straightforward, but rude. Shang Xingzhou raised his hand, indicating that she should not speak any further. He turned to the pope and said, "Of the 2 things that I want to do in the latter half of my life, one has already been done." He was naturally speaking of the Tianhai divine empress's death. "The second thing that I want to do is something that Junior Brother is also well aware of. It is to exterminate the demons and complete His Majesty Taizong's dying wish. You also agreed on this point, which is why you joined hands with me in this matter. You are even more clear that in order to exterminate the demons, we need to unite all the strength that can be united. His Majesty Taizong completed the alliance between the demi-human race and the human race, and Tianhai, and you formed the confluence of the North and South. Next is naturally the confluence of the East and West. Thus, many years ago, you began to cultivate Mu Jiushi. When she was 5, you left the position of Archbishop of the Hall of Announcements to her. So why can't she be Pope?" The Pope wanted to say something. Shang Xingzhou said, "I know that there has never been a precedent of a woman becoming Pope, but back then, you supported Tianhai's ascension to the throne of Emperor of the Great Zhou, so you should be able to support her. Junior Brother, do not forget that she represents the entire great Western continent. The position of Archbishop of the Hall of Announcements is not enough. We must pay even more. Only then can we see the era of the human race truly united. The Pope fell silent for a very long time. Finally, he put on his divine crown and divine robe and began to walk towards the stone wall deep within the hall. The stone wall gradually parted, a pure and holy light bursting out and shining on Mu Jioshu's face. Her smile was one of pride. Shang Xingzhou glanced at her. Mu Jioshu stepped forward and supported the Pope's arm. The Pope stopped and glanced at her. She looked back with a sweet smile, showing no intention of letting go. The Pope said nothing and walked towards the stone wall. On the other side was the Great Hall of Light. Several hundred bishops were quietly waiting within the hall. Tens of thousands of priests, teachers, and students, and cavalry were waiting outside the hall. The Pope walked to the place where the light was the brightest. Mu Jioshu stood at his side. At this sight, many of the important figures of the orthodoxy, including Lin and Zhuang Zhihuan, revealed expressions of shock. Mao Qiyu quietly stood at the very front, his expression unchanging. The Pope looked at the crowd and said, "I have a matter to announce." Chapter 675. All eyes were focused on the highest point of the Light Palace. As they gazed at the Pope and Mu Jioshu standing at his side, many people felt uneasy. What the Pope wanted to announce with such solemnity was naturally related to the coup of the Mausoleum of Books. Many people had even thought of Chen Changxing's name. The atmosphere was tense and uneasy. No one noticed that two people walked out of the passage at the side of the hall. Linghai Zhuang and Dao Xian, these two prefects of the orthodoxy, had been personally sealed by the Pope and imprisoned in the Dao prison. Why had they suddenly appeared? In just 3 days, they had lost a lot of weight, and their faces were pale without a trace of blood. They passed through the crowd and walked towards the front of the main hall. Finally, someone noticed their presence and let out a low cry. Gradually, there were more and more exclamations. Linghai Zhuang and Dao Siyuan once more stood at the very front of the Great Hall of Light. An expression of shock appeared on Archbishop and Lin's face, and Zhuang Zhihuan's pupils constricted slightly. Only Mao Qiyu and the Archbishop's leader, Daoist Baisher's expressions did not change. They had probably known about this beforehand. The main hall was filled with light. Mu Jioshu stood on the high platform, where the light was the brightest. Her vision was somewhat affected, and even with her background, she could not help but feel nervous at the thought of what the Pope was about to announce. She did not notice the cries of alarm and the momentary chaos coming from the crowd below the platform. In the next moment, she would become the successor to the orthodoxy, the future Pope. The current Pope glanced at her, his eyes brimming with compassion and love. She smiled shyly, but her mood was extremely calm. She was slightly excited as she looked forward to hearing those words. The Archbishop of the Hall of Announcements, Mu Jioshu, has gravely violated the laws of the Church and recklessly peered into the heavenly Tao. What punishment should she receive? The Light Palace was filled with frenzied exclamations and discussions. The Orthodoxy was about to welcome the first female pope in history. As expected, it was very shocking, Mu Jioshu thought with a reserved smile. Suddenly, her expression changed, and her face became incomparably pale, because it was only now that she clearly heard the Pope's voice. A serious violation of the Church's laws? Prying into the heavenly Tao. Could it be that His Holiness the Pope wanted to announce, not to confer upon him, the title of the next Pope? How could this be? What was going on? Mu Jioshu was shocked to the extreme, suddenly turning her head to the Pope. What she saw was still that old face, that pair of eyes filled with compassion and love. That compassion and tenderness were not bestowed upon her. She knew it very well. She was furious. "Why are you punishing me?" she coldly said to the Pope. She looked at the crowd below the platform and shouted sternly, "Who dares to punish me?" The crowd was silent. The priests who had the right to participate in the right to light were all important figures in the Orthodoxy. They were well aware of the origins of this mysterious Archbishop of the Hall of Announcements, and they also knew what her existence meant for the great cause of the Orthodoxy in the new millennium. However, their silence did not mean that they were uneasy. It was only because the Pope's question was not directed at them. The halls of the Orthodoxy each had their own duties. The Hall of Drifting Clouds was in charge of punishment, and the Archbishop of the Hall of Drifting Clouds had already arrived. Linghai Zhuang gazed at Mu Jiushi, the hatred in his eyes like a ghostly fire. 30 strikes of the cane, forbidden from cultivating and exiled from the Orthodoxy. These were the written laws of the Church. Anyone in the hall could recite them, but upon hearing these 3 sentences, they still felt a bone-piercing chill. It had already been 600 years since the Orthodoxy had carried out such a harsh punishment on an archbishop of Mu Jiushi's level. Looking into Linghai Zhuang's eyes, Mu Jiushi felt her body become abnormally cold. She knew that she could not stay any longer. With a grunt, she turned and floated out of the hall. She was confident that as long as she left the Great Hall of Light, Shang Xingzhou would assuredly be able to protect her. The position of Pope was already like a bubble, but the future could still be expected. Yet the moment she floated off the platform, she realized that she had lost control of her body and crashed to the ground. Linghai Zhuang, accompanied by several cardinals of the Hall of Drifting Clouds, impassively arrived in front of her. Terrifying ripples of qi could be faintly felt from the depths of the pure and holy light, as well as Mu Jiushi's furious shouts. After all, she represented the great Western continent. After receiving Mao Qiuyu's signal, Linghai Zhuang used the excuse of the absence of the divine staff to temporarily record 30 strikes of the rod. But the forbidden technique was still a very frightening matter. One had to endure unimaginable pain and torture. The Pope did not hear, so no one in the hall heard. It was as quiet as a sleeping sea. Supported by Mao Qiuyu and Taoist Baishu, the Pope descended from the platform and walked to the center of the priests. He gazed at these people that had served him for centuries and said, 3 days ago, I said that I was going to die. Sorrowful sobs rose from the crowd. After I die, the position of Pope shall be passed on to Chen Changsheng, the Pope declared. His expression was very calm as he said this. It was like he was saying that the Hall of Pure Virtue should be repaired and that the pigeons in the left garden of the Li Palace had been fed a little too fat. After the Battle of the Bridge of Helplessness, the Pope had bestowed the divine staff, the symbol of the Orthodoxy's authority, upon Chen Changsheng. Everyone understood what this signified, and now he once more confirmed it. This signified an irresistible will and majesty. The entire Orthodoxy would protect these words at all costs, all the way until Chen Changsheng ascended to the position of Pope. With Mao Qiuyu and Taoist Baishu at their head, all the bishops, the priests outside the hall, the teachers and students of the academies, and the Orthodoxy cavalry all prostrated on the ground like a tide. Taoist Siyuan prostrated, as did Linghai Zhuang. Gradually, they calmed down and then devoutly began to chant the Taoist scriptures, praising the starry sky and virtue. The hall exploded with light. Old Man Yin, my royal father will not let you go. My sister will definitely take revenge for me. Mu Jiushi's furious shouts could be faintly heard in the distance, gradually transforming into sobs and then fading away. This mysterious princess from the great Western continent, once a prefect of the Orthodoxy, had been expelled from the Li Palace, and she would probably never have the chance to take another step inside. The Pope was watering the plants. There were only 3 green leaves left in the pot. They were rather weary, but they were still alive. After the dust was wiped away, they recovered a great deal of their spirit. Why? Shang Xingzhou's voice was devoid of emotion. You also asked before, why did Chen Changsheng become Pope? The Pope raised his head and calmly replied, because I wanted him to be Pope. Shang Xingzhou was somewhat surprised by this answer, his gaze sinking. This was definitely not the junior brother he had known for almost 1,000 years. Senior brother, you said that you came to see me today to discuss the legacy of my orthodoxy, but the orthodoxy is not your orthodoxy. The Pope placed the wet handkerchief by the pool and took out a dry towel to wipe the beads of water from his hands. If I must say which person's orthodoxy it is, then this is my orthodoxy. Shang Xingzhou confirmed that his judgment was correct. The Pope of today was no longer the Een of the past 1,000 years. Why? He expressionlessly said. So for the sake of your own emotional inclinations, you completely disregard the greater good of the human race and the future of the orthodoxy. The Pope was quiet for a while, then said, On that night in the mausoleum of books, the Empress said that I was trapped in the salvation of the world. This was correct. If it was the me of the past, perhaps for the greater good of the human race and the future of the orthodoxy, I really might have taken back the divine staff from Chun Changsheng and then, as you wished, conferred the title of the next pope on that little girl. Shang Xingzhou asked, Why is it impossible for the current you? It's still the same words, the Pope calmly said. I'm old and about to die. I have to live a few days the way I want to live. When a person was about to die, they naturally had the right to be a little more unbridled. They did not need to look at the world with pity. They could be a little more free, did not need to think about the greater good of the human race. They could be a little more short-sighted and not look at the future of the orthodoxy. He was the Pope, so the orthodoxy was his, not anyone else's. If he wanted Chun Changsheng to be the next pope, then no one else could even think about sitting on that seat. This was very convincing. Shang Xingzhou stared at him for a very long time, then suddenly said, He was raised by me. I know that even if you want him to be, he won't be. The Pope replied, I will give the orthodoxy to him. As for whether he wants it or not, that's his own business. Shang Xingzhou closed his eyes and then opened them, his eyes indifferent. A dead man cannot be the Pope. The Pope's expression did not change. You want to kill him? Shang Xingzhou expressionlessly replied. Even if he's just a little dog, after raising him for so many years, I still have some feelings for him. How could I bear to personally kill him? The Pope replied, I've never understood how you could raise a student like Qin Changshen. Only now do I understand that he was not raised by you. Shang Xingzhou replied, Everything he is comes from me, so it's only natural that I was the one who raised him. The Pope calmly said, If he really was raised by you, how could you not know just how powerful he is on the verge of death? Shang Xingzhou's eyes narrowed. In the library of the Orthodox Academy. I was raised by him. Chun Changsheng continued. When I want to understand him, I can especially understand him. I know that 3 days ago, in the mausoleum of books, he had me take away the divine Empress's body because he wanted to intentionally leave some loose ends in this matter and use it to stir up trouble. Even if Martial Uncle the Pope continues to protect me, there will still be people like you who will use this matter to kill me. Eunuch Lin nodded. Correct. Even if I didn't come to the Orthodox Academy, someone else would. Chun Changsheng said, But there's a problem. Eunuch Lin arched his brows. What problem? Qin Changsheng raised the sword in his hand and calmly asked, Can you kill me? Recently, my updates have not been good and have not been explained. Today, I will report the situation to everyone. I took my leader on a trip for several days, and then midway, I had to interrupt the trip and return home. Because my mother was not feeling well, she was hospitalized. After several days of examination and preparation, the current situation is that I will have a preoperative talk tomorrow and then sign the papers. I will strive to complete the operation on Saturday or Sunday. When I have time, I will continue writing. If I don't have the time or energy to keep up, I will tell everyone. Chapter 676. Eunuch Lin's raised brows slowly fell back down, but the corners of his lips slowly rose. This was a sigh and also a self-mockery, but ultimately, it was a mockery towards Chun Changsheng. Eunuch Lin had grown up in the imperial palace. He was extremely talented and experienced, and the technique he cultivated was extremely profound. Many years ago, he had already reached the peak of star condensation. If not for the fact that in Taizong's later years, when the situation in the imperial court was extremely perilous, he had castrated himself at the most crucial moment of his cultivation and entered the palace. Henceforth, he would have become a deformed person, and he might even have entered the divine domain. No matter how high Chun Changsheng's cultivation talent was, no matter how many treasures he had, no matter how many tricks he had, no matter how close he was to killing Zhou Tong that night, he was still no match for him. He was only 17, and he had also failed to enter star condensation in Mount Han. Previously, Outside of Orthodox Academy, Su Mo was worried about Chun Changsheng's safety and stopped Eunuch Lin's attendance, saying that one person was enough to announce the edict. Eunuch Lin's reply was that if they wanted to kill Chun Changsheng, a decree and he alone were enough. This was not a lie, but the truth. At this moment, Chun Changsheng asked him seriously, "Can you kill me?" Eunuch Lin's smile gradually faded. Turning to Chun Changsheng, he said, "After leaving the capital for 20 years, it seems that the youngsters these days have all forgotten who I am." Chun Changsheng didn't say anything. He used his actions to express his feelings. 2 streaks of dust floated up from under his boots. That represented his strength. Then, the dust suddenly became chaotic along with his sleeves. They turned into several lines and pulled out afterimages in the space of the library. He disappeared from where he stood. More than 10 extremely faint footprints appeared on the dark and bright floor. Those footprints seemed to have appeared at the same time. If someone were to carefully examine the positions of those footprints, they might be able to associate them with the positions of some of the stars in the starry sky, or the lines on the reflecting monolith. The incomparably complicated positions of the stars and the incalculable star maps represented the direction, sequence, and movement at an extraordinary speed. It was the secret technique of the demon race, the Yeshur step. The space at the main entrance of the library was slightly distorted. A sword shadow pierced through the sunlight outside the building. Chun Changsheng's figure followed. At this moment, he had already arrived before Eunuch Lin. His speed was incomparably fast, and it even gave people a feeling that even lightning was not as fast as him. Perhaps it was because when he used the Yeshur step, he had also used his most powerful move, the blazing sword. The sword light illuminated the door of the library, suppressing the sunlight that spilled in from outside. A blazing aura enveloped the area, and then it rapidly spread in all directions. The yellowing grass outside the library instantly became even wilder, and the edges of the books on the bookshelves in the library curled up at a speed visible to the naked eye, as if they had lost all their moisture. The stainless sword blazed with flames as it stabbed at Eunuch Lin's forehead. Eunuch Lin's expression froze, a little surprised. He didn't expect that the power contained in this sword would be so strong. Slightly different from the rumors, Chun Changsheng's true essence was actually so abundant. Even when compared to those elites who had cultivated for hundreds of years, he was not inferior. Or was it because of this sword move? It was said that Suli had passed on to Chun Changsheng a sword technique that could rapidly increase his true essence for a short period of time. It seemed that this was the case. As he thought of these things, Eunuch Lin's sleeves were already flying up. Extremely pure starlight exuded from his body and poured into his sleeves. Like 2 stone mountains that had flown down from the heavens, that trapped Chun Changsheng's sword between them, against the divine weapon of the tier of legendary weapons, the incomparably sharp stainless sword. Eunuch Lin had actually divided his star domain into 2 and used it as a weapon. What sort of genius was this response? What sort of tyrannical and unparalleled technique was this? In a battle between cultivators, what mattered was comprehension, like battle awareness, like adaptability, like experience. But what was truly important was still strength itself. Eunuch Lin was a peak star condensation expert, his star domain almost perfect, and his true essence incomparably abundant. His comprehension of the laws of the world far surpassed Chun Changsheng's, so he was naturally able to control the entire battle. Would this battle end just like this? Of course not. Both Eunuch Lin and Chun Changsheng knew that this was only the beginning. The sheath known as the Vault Sheath still concealed several thousand peerless swords. With the protection of those peerless swords, Chun Changsheng could make Zhou Tong bleed from head to toe, and he could at least hold Eunuch Lin back for a few moments. Eunuch Lin was well aware of this point. He was not prepared to give Chun Changsheng a chance to attack, so he had chosen to divide his star domain. This seemed valiant, but it was actually somewhat dangerous, a method that could even be described as underestimating the enemy. Eunuch Lin wanted to ensure that his hand was free. At this moment, his sleeves, carrying the star domain, sealed the edge of Chun Changsheng's sword. His hand, meanwhile, passed through the sleeve, and rested in the middle of the sword. Qin Changxing's sword was formed from the stainless sword and the vault sheath, and Eunuch Lin's hand rested on the opening of the sheath. Since he dared to hold it there, Eunuch Lin was naturally confident in dealing with the swords in the sheath, or perhaps he had long since made his preparations. Suddenly, Eunuch Lin's pupils constricted in disbelief. With a shrill shriek, he wanted to swiftly retreat. What emerged from the sheath was not a sword. It was a small black stone. Logically speaking, an unremarkable little stone should not have been able to make Eunuch Lin feel as if he were facing a great foe or even think of retreating. But Eunuch Lin was an expert in the Tao, and his comprehension of the laws of the world had already reached a sublime level. When he saw this black stone, he sensed that something was wrong. He could sense that a power that transcended the secular world was following this black stone. Since it had already transcended the secular world, it was naturally impossible to avoid. Eunuch Lin's fingers spread out like flowers, shattering the air in the library and grabbing the black stone in his hand. With a crack, 3 of his finger bones broke into 13 pieces, and soon after, his wrist bones also shattered. Only now did he understand that this power that transcended the secular world did not come from the divine staff, nor did it come from some unknown divine artifact. This power was weight, an unimaginable weight. A weight like the weight of the sky fell on Eunuch Lin's body. His face became abnormally pale, his body trembling, the floor beneath his feet cracking into countless holes. The black stone was a heavenly tome monolith left behind by Wang Jitsa. The heavenly tome monoliths themselves were very heavy, but the weight of this black stone was because it was also a door leading to the Garden of Zhou. 3 days ago, in the Mausoleum of Books, Qin Changsheng had personally seen the Pope pluck a green leaf and use the majestic power of the world to attack the Divine Empress. From that scene, he had comprehended a few things. The black stone was not the true Garden of Zhou. It only carried a little qi of the Garden of Zhou, or perhaps a very small part of the Garden of Zhou. But Eunuch Lin was also not the Divine Empress. Since you are using this world to suppress me, I will use my world to strike you. The Garden of Zhou was even larger than the green leaf world, but the green leaf was a complete world, while the black stone was only a door to this world. Qin Changxing's cultivation was also far inferior to the Pope's. Eunuch Lin had only encountered a method that he had never thought of before and was unable to respond, resulting in his passivity. As long as he could hold on for a few moments, he would presumably be able to find a way to break it. But a few moments was enough to do many things. With the appearance of the black stone, an autumn wind blew through the library and the sky suddenly darkened. Eunuch Lin felt like he was pressed down by the starry sky, finding it difficult to move. 10,000 sword glows flowed out of Qin Changxing's sheath and surged forward. The sword glows tore through the starry sky, sliced apart the autumn wind, and seized the light of the sky. Countless sword intents crisscrossed, countless swords clanging and clanging, occasionally accompanied by Eunuch Lin's furious howls and the sounds of his berserk attacks. Suddenly, all sound in the library vanished, as did the sword intents. It was incomparably quiet. Boom! Countless fragments flew out of the library, forming an extremely wide ball of dust in the Orthodox Academy. The autumn wind blew through the library, carrying away the dust and fragments, leaving behind a clear and bright scene. All the doors and windows of the library had disappeared, leaving only 2 figures in the empty space. One standing, one sitting. The one standing was Qin Changsheng, sword in hand, calm and silent. Eunuch Lin's body was covered in blood as he sat on the ground. Chapter 677. Eunuch Lin's face was ghastly pale, his body dripping with blood, but it could not conceal the dense sword wounds. He seemed abnormally miserable and wretched. At this moment, he no longer had the appearance of an expert outside the Orthodox Academy. He was like an old beggar, pitiful at the sight of him. "What's going on here?" His voice trembled violently, his eyes filled with disbelief and shock, and then he became somewhat absent-minded. Even now, he still did not understand what had happened at the start of this battle. Why did that black stone possess such terrifying weight? Perhaps it had come from the divine staff? But what truly shocked him, what he found impossible to accept, was what had happened afterwards. When Chen Changsheng had attacked, he had not found a single chance to counterattack. In that moment, the sword glow had illuminated the library and ended the battle. Chen Changsheng's sword had been too fast, his swordplay incomparably sharp, his sword energy incomparably powerful. His cultivation on the path of the sword had already far surpassed his imagination. He could not understand. Even if this young man had begun learning the sword in his mother's womb, it was impossible for him to cultivate the path of the sword to such a level in 17 years. And in this battle, Chen Changsheng had also displayed a few other inconceivable abilities, like his quantity of true essence, like his perfect star domain. How is this possible? Eunuch Lin shrieked at Chen Changsheng. Chen Changsheng replied, Master might have forgotten a few things. Thanks to him, my illness has already been cured. 300-some faint starlight was currently receding into the depths of his academy uniform. One could faintly imagine how beautiful it must have been when those stars had all lit up at the same time. Although he said it was thanks to him, his expression was very flat, devoid of any gratitude. But what he said was the truth. At the peak of the mausoleum of books, the divine empress had defied the heavens and changed his fate, curing his illness. In Mount Han, he had already succeeded in star condensation and had even condensed a perfect star domain. Now that his illness had been cured, his true essence flowed freely, so he had naturally become a perfect star condensation cultivator. The meridians in his body were incomparably smooth. Those mountainous blockages had all been transformed into flat and vast grasslands. Those meandering streams that were difficult to advance had long ago become great rivers. In the past few years, the starlight falling from the night sky had penetrated the library and entered his body, turning into an extremely thick snowfield. Now, the snowfield could burn wantonly and flow to its heart's content. 2 years ago, when his meridians were blocked, he could rely on his own swordplay and Taoist techniques to consecutively complete breakthroughs. A few days ago, when he was still heavily injured, he could rely on his endless magical artifacts and methods, Su Li's sword and Zhou Dufu's blade, to almost kill a powerful expert of Zhou Tong's level, let alone now. It could be said with certainty that the current Chen Changsheng finally had the ability to fight against true elites for a short period of time. He was no longer that young patient from Xining village who had come to the capital to seek treatment and change his fate. Instead, he was an extremely talented genius who was well-versed in the Taoist canon, extremely knowledgeable, and had encountered many brilliant teachers. Perhaps he still couldn't see his fate clearly and what was waiting for him in front of him, but at least there was no longer that shadow, and there was light. Right now, killing him was already a very difficult task. As long as it was an opponent below the divine domain, even if he was no match, he could at least last for a while. Those who still hadn't thought of this point, like Eunuch Lin, would all receive a deep lesson. Eunuch Lin had underestimated his opponent, allowing him to strike first. As a result, he was now covered in blood and sitting on the ground, so shocked that he was somewhat absent-minded. Chen Changsheng raised his sword and walked to the door of the library, the starlight gradually concealed in his clothes. Eunuch Lin's face was pale as he leaned against the half-broken door sill. He opened his mouth to shout, but he realized that there was an invisible barrier separating the library from the outside world. The Orthodox Academy had only been accepting new students for a year and was still far from its former glory, much less able to recover its former resources and strength. However, as principal, Chen Changsheng could still control a few arrays. "You're afraid." Chen Changsheng walked up to him and looked into his eyes. Somewhat confused, he said, "It turns out that you're also afraid of death." Eunuch Lin was furious and humiliated. He yelled, "If you want to kill me, then kill me. Don't humiliate me." Chen Changsheng shook his head. "You've misunderstood. I really did believe that you weren't afraid of death." Eunuch Lin was dumbfounded. Chen Changsheng looked at him and seriously said, "I've read many stories in the books. Famous scholars like you, loyal ministers, don't you all feel that you have a righteous cause in your hands and are not afraid of death? Just as he said, this was a misunderstanding. He was not intentionally humiliating him, but his calm tone made Eunuch Lin extremely angry. Coughing up blood, he harshly said, "Not afraid of death doesn't mean that you don't fear death. As long as you're human, you will fear death because there will always be people or things that you can't let go of, like His Majesty." "I'm not afraid," Chun Chongsheng suddenly said. Eunuch Lin was stunned. "What did you say?" Chun Chongsheng looked at him and seriously said, "I'm not afraid of death." The library once more fell silent. Only the autumn wind blew in through the broken doors and windows, ruffling the pages of the books and emitting the smell of the dust of many years. It was just like what he had said. It was a smell that easily made one feel sad, filled with hopelessness. A life without any expectations was like a book on a bookshelf that no one had opened. No matter how rich the content, it was all meaningless. If one said that people feared death because they still had people or things that they could not let go of in this world, then when he said that he did not fear death, perhaps it meant that he no longer had anything that he could not let go of? Eunuch Lin looked at Chun Chongsheng, unable to find the slightest fluctuation of emotion on his face. He was 17, in the prime of his youth, yet he was quiet like an old well, autumn waters, fallen leaves, withered trees, deep and heavy. Eunuch Lin suddenly felt some pity and sympathy for him, and said nothing more. Chun Chongsheng then said something unexpected. "Go, I won't kill you." Eunuch Lin's pupils constricted as he coldly said, "If you want to kill me, this is your best chance, perhaps your last chance." Chun Chongsheng understood what he meant. Eunuch Lin was a peak star condensation expert, a true expert that bordered on the divine. If he had underestimated his foe and allowed that black stone to suddenly attack him, he would never have fallen to such a state. If he let him go now, Eunuch Lin would definitely not act like this when they met again in the future. The difference in strength between the two meant that he had no chance at all. In the future, it might be very difficult for us to meet again. He looked at Eunuch Lin and said, "Please take good care of my senior brother." Eunuch Lin fell silent for a very long time, then said, "It seems that you are well aware of what will happen today." Chun Chongsheng said nothing. Eunuch Lin said, "Principal Shang has gone to the Li Palace. After today, you will no longer be the successor to the Pope. No one will help you, and you will have to directly face the pressure of the entire world. Because of your position, the events that have occurred in the capital in the last 3 years will make many people uncomfortable, and those people will all be the victors this time. Yes, whether it was the princes of the Chun clan, the Tianhai clan, or the ministers of the court, none of them were willing to continue seeing Chun Chongsheng in the capital. Because of the problem of the distribution of benefits, because of the problem of his position, and also because of the problem that no one had ever declared. When people saw Chun Chongsheng, they very easily thought of the Divine Empress. The library was very quiet. Eunuch Lin's figure gradually vanished, but Chun Chongsheng still did not speak. This battle that had no spectators and no records would be remembered by very few people in the future, much less mentioned. Naturally, it would also not be recorded in the books of history. But in reality, this battle was very important. It was the battle in which Chun Chongsheng had displayed his most perfect strength since his arrival in the capital, and it was also the battle that laid the foundation for him to become a true expert. He had won and could have killed his opponent, but he had not, because this old man was loyal to his senior brother, because he only wanted to defeat his opponent. He only wanted to win once, wanted to experience for once what it was like to not be sick, what it was like to live without thinking about death. As for the other matters, he truly did not care. Those people wanted the Divine Empress's body, but he would not give it to them. Those people knew that he would not give it to them, so they wanted to use this matter to denounce him. It was best to just kill him, but he did not care. So be it. He gazed up at the sky above the Orthodox Academy and could faintly make out the traces of several red eagles flying past. Outside the Orthodox Academy came the heavy stamping of hooves, like a torrential rain, like thunder. The black-armored heavy cavalry began their charge. South Stream Temple's sword array naturally could not stand against them. And this was not even considering the many somber and sinister cheese that came from the Orthodox Academy's autumn forest. It was just that he didn't know if they were the assassins of the department for purging officials or the army. In the next moment, countless people would surge into the Orthodox Academy, destroying the forest, the lake, the great banyan tree, and the pavilions. Chen Sheng did not accept it. He took a letter from his bosom. After tearing open this letter, many people would die, and then he would probably also die. But he was very calm, very composed. The hand that gripped the letter did not tremble in the slightest, as if he did not care about any of this. Chapter 678. Tearing open the letter, delivering death to others, and then welcoming his own death, Chen Chongsheng truly did not care. Just as he had said to Eunuch Lin, he truly did not fear death, because there was nothing he could not let go of. All the people and matters of this world were insignificant to him, because 3 days ago, he had suddenly realized that his existence had no meaning. He stood at the broken threshold of the library, holding the letter as he quietly waited for that moment to arrive. The autumn wind curled over the lake. The great banyan tree stretched its waist in the sunlight, still exuding a greenness that formed a sharp contrast with the golden leaves on the grass. Time slowly passed, but the Orthodox Academy remained quiet. Chen Chongsheng raised his head to the academy gate, his brows slowly rising like a fallen leaf that had just been swept up by the wind. The thunderous galloping stopped at a certain point. The dust in the distance gradually descended to the base of the academy walls, no longer moving. The academy gate was still tightly shut, the stone walls undamaged. The fallen leaf that had fallen back into the lake had attracted the pursuit of a few fish. It was still quiet. No one charged into the Orthodox Academy. Neither the black-armored heavy cavalry nor the experts and assassins of the Great Zhou army or the department for purging officials hiding outside the academy walls or in the forest appeared. Su Moyu and those teachers and students of the Orthodox Academy stood even closer, watching the academy gate. They saw Eunuch Lin's miserable appearance and faintly guessed at what had happened in the library. They were shocked by Chen Chongsheng's hidden strength, and they also understood Chen Chongsheng's choice. The Orthodox Academy had reached its most crucial moment. After Eunuch Lin left, the Orthodox Academy's gate once more tightly shut. To their surprise, the world outside the gate suddenly grew quiet. They were very nervous and did not relax because of the current silence. They only felt that it was very strange. The thunderous galloping outside the gate had been real and had entered all their ears. The piercingly cold-killing intent was also real, and it chilled all of their uniforms. The sword glows were like water, reflecting a hint of autumn. The South Stream Temple sword array changed once more. Yi Xiaolian flew out of the array to the very front and asked Su Moyu, "Just what has happened?" Su Moyu's face showed a determined expression. He walked forward and pushed open the courtyard door with both hands. As the academy gate opened, a figure appeared before the eyes of the teachers and students of the Orthodox Academy. Sunlight spilled into the courtyard, accompanied by 2 cool breezes. It was an elder. He stood on the stone steps in front of the Orthodox Academy. His back was to them, and his 2 wide sleeves danced in the wind. Su Moyu was somewhat shocked. Principal Mao? 2 sleeves Mao Chuyu, the former principal of the Heavenly Tao Academy, was now the Archbishop of the Hall of Illustrious Persons. Students of the 6 Ivies like Su Moyu were still used to calling him principal. Before Su Moyu could recover from his shock, he was once again shocked by the other figures on the field. The Archbishop had ordered Daoist Bai Shi and Lin, Daoist Yuan, and Linghai Zhuang to stand on the stone platform in front of the Orthodox Academy. Of the Orthodoxy's 6 prefects, 5 had personally come. Soon after, Su Moyu saw even more familiar figures. The current principal of the Heavenly Tao Academy, Zhuang Zhihuan, the Archbishop of the Temple Seminary, the unrivaled professor of the 13 divisions of Radiant Green, and his former teacher, the principal of the Li Palace Academy. The row of restaurants on the other side of Hundred Flowers Lane had already been flattened by the imperial court's armies, but now dust was rising from them. One could see a tide of cavalry, a dense black mass. The Orthodox Academy was still surrounded, but it was not being surrounded. This was because these cavalry were no longer the black-armored heavy cavalry of the imperial court, but the Orthodoxy cavalry directly under the Lee Palace. The sabers, spears, and divine crossbows of the Orthodoxy cavalry were all pointed outwards. Sumoyu was very shocked. He vaguely understood that those thunderous hooves had not been the signal for the black-armored heavy cavalry to charge, but that the Orthodoxy cavalry had come to reinforce them. He subconsciously turned his head to look at the Orthodox Academy. He saw that the autumn forest was just as quiet as before. On the walls and in the forest, he could faintly make out the figures of many priests. In particular, there was a red-robed bishop with a high cultivation base standing around the library, separated by over 100 feet. This array of forces was truly shocking and speechless. This was the Lee Palace unabashedly displaying its strength to the world. Before this strength, even the great Zhou imperial court had to display the corresponding respect and courtesy. Sumoyu knew that the Orthodox Academy was safe and relaxed. Then he felt his back become somewhat damp and cold. Only now did he realize that the moment he pushed open the gate, he had been so nervous that his entire body had been covered in sweat. The disciples of South Stream Temple and the teachers and students of the Orthodox Academy came behind him and looked out of the courtyard. Besides shock, they all felt as if they had just survived a calamity. The windows and doors of the library had already been destroyed, and the air of autumn was exceptionally thick. The Pope stood behind Chen Changsheng and said, "To cultivators, life is an extremely long process. In this process, we will encounter many difficulties, many disappointments. These are the so-called tribulations. How to face these tribulations, whether to live on with the joy of surviving a calamity, or whether to find oneself after serious reflection. This is the most important difference. I gave you 3 days to think, and I also gave you 3 days to go to the Lee Palace to see me, but you did not, so I could only personally ask you just how you intend to choose." Qin Changsheng did not turn around, nor did he intend to answer. The Pope understood why he had not requested reinforcements from the Lee Palace in these 3 days. "You feel that all of us have deceived you?" Qin Changsheng remained silent. The Pope said, "As long as I live, I will protect you. This is my promise to Mei Lisha." Qin Changsheng still said nothing. The Pope walked to his side, and together with him looked out the window that no longer existed, saying, "I am about to die." When he heard these words, Qin Changsheng's gaze fell on the grass by the lake. It was covered in a thick layer of fallen leaves. Some of them glowed with a golden luster and were very beautiful, while others were gray and decaying, lifeless and lifeless. He finally spoke. "Martial uncle, just what do you want me to say?" The Pope gazed at the yellow and red forest and that rather striking green banyan tree. He indifferently said, "The past is the past. That is time. Similarly, the movement of the stars, the changes of fate, all can only move forward, so we can also only look forward. No matter what sort of harm those things have caused to you, at the very least, your illness is now cured." According to the thinking of a normal person, Chen Changsheng had not suffered any harm in the coup of the Mausoleum of Books, but had instead obtained the greatest benefit. When he closed his eyes, it would be nightfall. After he died, his world would be destroyed. Of course, there was nothing more important than continuing to live, more worthy of rejoicing. The Pope was not a normal person. He would not think this way. He only wanted to point out this point to awaken Chen Changsheng. Mei Lisha should have calculated this point back then, so he did not refuse Senior's proposal. He believed that, compared to the deception, use, sorrow, and pain you received, you would receive a sufficient return. "This is my conjecture," Qin Changsheng said. "Sir knows that I am not Tang Tang, nor am I Wang Pa. I am not skilled in accounting." These words had a deeper meaning. The Pope faintly smiled but did not take it. He continued, "Your blood should not be a problem in the future. Even the Empress did not dare to eat you. so naturally no one would dare to covet you, unless the demon lord personally acts. But right now, he can't even take care of himself, so he should not be able to threaten you. Qin Changxing asked what happened. The Pope replied, there is still no definite news. We only know that Xuelao City has been sealed for 3 days. Chapter 679. Xuelao City was perpetually beset by wind and snow. It was extremely far from the human world, but it had never been cut off from news. The capital of the demons was a large city like the capital in Luoyang. Even if all 17 city gates were closed, there were still countless ways to send news to the outside world. Yet Xuelao City had already been sealed for 3 days. Yet the Pope still did not know what had happened in Xuelao City. It was obvious that this was no ordinary sealing of the city. An earth-shaking event had certainly taken place in the city. Only 3 days had passed since the incident at the Mausoleum of Books. Qin Changsheng recalled the words his master had said to the divine empress that night. He had said that he had long since made preparations for the demons. Could it be that the sealing of Xuelao City had something to do with this? He shook his head, no longer pondering these questions. What did what happened in Xuelao City have to do with him? The Pope gazed at his profile and sensed the change in his mood. A useful body should always be used to do useful things, whether it's for the common people of the world or to calm the Tao heart. Qin Changsheng gazed at the fallen leaves outside the window and somewhat woodenly said, I've already been used many times. Bystanders might have found these words rather incomprehensible, but the Pope knew what he was trying to express, and a hint of pity and guilt appeared in his eyes. Besides being used, there will always be other uses like relatives, like friends. He looked at Qin Changsheng and said, Your surname is Qin. You're a member of the imperial clan, and many of your relatives live here. Is Master referring to those princes? Qin Changxing asked. They will only wish for me to die a little earlier. This was a very accurate judgment. Whether it was the Prince of Xiang, whose power would soon reach the heavens, or the Prince of Zhongshan, who would soon control the enormous power of the great Zhou army. The person they feared the most was Qin Changsheng. Because Qin Changsheng was also a member of the imperial clan, Shang Xingzhou's student, a celebrity known to the entire world. More importantly, he was the future pope. In a struggle for the imperial throne or for power, he was the opponent that the princes of the Chen clan least wanted to see. As for the word kinship, it was a joke to the Chen imperial clan. Almost 1,000 years had passed, but no one had forgotten the coup of the 100 Herb Garden. These princes were all descendants of Taizong. So how could they be happy to see the descendants of the deceased regain so much authority? The Pope understood Qin Changxing's meaning and said, Even so, you still have relatives. The kin here naturally referred to the remnant races currently living on the Sacred Light Continent. For example, that monk who had once appeared by the stream bank of Xining Village's old temple. Those members of the imperial clan that had been chased by Emperor Taizong to the other continent were naturally Qin Changxing's relatives in terms of bloodline. It was even possible that his parents were still living there. Qin Changsheng understood that the Pope had mentioned the people of the Sacred Light Continent not because he wanted him to do something, but to convince him that he was connected to this world. This kind of connection might be able to make him feel some warmth towards this world and not be as cold as before. Or perhaps it could be said that he could find some reasons to like this world. This moved him a little, but he was moved because the Pope had said these words, not because of the content of those words. This was because he did not have a good impression of those kin living on the Sacred Light Continent. Those are not my relatives. They're all bad people. Qin Changsheng said, When I was still a baby, no, even when I was still a fetus, they did so many things to me. What things? In order to make the Tianhai Divine Empress believe that he was Crown Prince Xiaoming, the people of the Sacred Light Continent had used external forces to forcefully destroy his sun wheel and sever his meridians when he was still an infant or even a fetus, then poured into him an incomparably dangerous energy of sacred light that seemed to be brimming with qi of life. In setting up this scheme, neither his master nor his relatives on the Sacred Light Continent could have imagined that the Tianhai Divine Empress would ultimately help him defy the heavens and change his fate. This also meant that, At the end of this scheme, he would either be eaten by the Tianhai Divine Empress or ignored and die. This also meant that, from the moment he was born, the infant was destined not to live past the age of 20. This was a very cruel thing. Thus, those people were all bad people. My medical skills are very good, and I live a very regular life. I never eat anything heavy with oil or salt, much less pickled food. I live a healthy life and earnestly cultivate. I came to the capital from Xining. I said that I wanted to break off the engagement, but in truth, I wanted to cure my illness, save myself, defy the heavens, change my fate. Everything I did, the goal I lived for was to survive. As he gazed at those leaves bobbing on the surface of the lake, Chen Chongqing's expression became rather gloomy. Now that my illness has been cured, I can continue to live. I can live past the age of 20, 200, even 1,000, but I suddenly realized that I was just a substitute, a tool, a fruit. My existence originally had no meaning. So what meaning is there in continuing to exist? The Pope wanted to say something, but hesitated. Martial uncle, I know that you want to comfort me, but I have nothing now. He paused, then continued. I don't even have my illness anymore. As he said this, his voice did not tremble in the slightest, seeming very calm. But even the Pope, who had experienced all the vicissitudes of life and had seen all the ways of the world, felt sorrowful. He had nothing, not even his illness. Just how much sorrow and grief were concealed in these calm words. The Pope sighed. He had come to the Orthodox Academy today precisely to have Chen Chongqing pull himself together, to at least find the meaning of life. Yet Chen Chongqing had told him that his existence had no meaning in the first place. He wanted to convince Chen Chongqing that this world still had goodwill towards him. But in reality, from the moment he was born, this world had only been brimming with malice towards Chen Chongqing. He could have continued to persuade Chen Chongqing, like Yu Ren, Su Yurong, or the Tang 36. But seeing such a calm and sorrowful 17-year-old youth, he could not bear to say anything more. In truth, I originally thought that I would not see you in the Orthodox Academy, or perhaps see you packing your luggage, but since you did not, it means that you are still hesitating. This world has no goodwill towards you, so you must treat yourself even better and make the choice that is best for you. Take your time, don't be anxious. I can still live for a few more days. After saying this, the Pope left the Orthodox Academy. Chen Chongqing did not turn around. He continued to look out the window at the autumn scenery, so he did not realize that the Pope's back was very desolate as he left. The Pope left the Orthodox Academy, and Mao Chuyu and the other prefects of the Orthodoxy also followed suit. Several dozen cardinals and the Orthodoxy cavalry also withdrew. The cavalry and experts of the great Zhou imperial court did not appear again, because the Li Palace had already displayed its strength and expressed its stance. Chen Chongqing would still be the next pope. The Orthodox Academy regained its peace. The Academy gate opened once more, welcoming in the thick aura of autumn. Some teachers and students took advantage of the chaos to leave, their names recorded by Su Mou in a small notebook. Even more teachers and students did not leave. They began to clean and tidy up the stone shavings around the library, at the same time preparing for tomorrow's class. Chen Chongqing went to the neighboring 100-her garden. The forest here was even denser than the forest in the Orthodox Academy or the Dalian forest. The colors of the forest, dyed by the aura of autumn, were very beautiful. There was a stone table in the forest. There was no teapot or cup on the table. He sat at the table, in a daze. Chapter 680. Dozens of residences were completely flattened, and only the tea house remained. In the depths of 100 Flower Street, where the smoke and dust had just settled, several carriages arrived. There was no one in front of the Orthodox Academy's gate. It was very quiet, but in reality, there were countless pairs of eyes watching from the shadows. Prince Qinlu alighted from the carriage. The youngest regional prince of the Zhou dynasty still had the same gentle expression as before, giving people the feeling of being bathed in the spring breeze. However, the aura of nobility that emanated from his body was much thicker. Perhaps it was because he was calmer than before. The light between his brows was brighter, and his face seemed clearer. 14 princes, surnamed Chen, entered the capital, with the Prince of Xiang as their leader. It had already been proposed in the imperial court that the Prince of Xiang would also serve as Minister of State. He was the Prince of Xiang's son, and also the only descendant of the Chun clan that had remained in the capital for 10-some years. This made him feared by many princes and even his brothers, but it also represented his contributions. Without him, the princes of the Qin clan would have found it very difficult to stabilize the situation in the capital in such a short time. Prince Chen Lu walked to the gate of the Orthodox Academy. No one came to welcome him, and no one stopped him. Only several sharp and light sword essences came out of the courtyard walls like winter plum blossoms. Several Taoist experts with profound gazes and extraordinary realms came to stand behind him. Prince Chen Lu waved his hand, indicating for the experts of the prince's mansion to stay where they were. He then walked in alone. Even when he walked into the Orthodox Academy, there was still no one who came to welcome him or stop him. There was only the color of the autumn sunlight and the great banyan tree by the lake. Prince Chen Lu walked towards the library. For the past 2 years, he and Chun Changsheng had been either at Clear Lake Restaurant or here. Dozens of young girls were sitting or standing on the grass by the lake, whispering something. Prince Chen Lu was a little surprised at this sight. The Holy Maiden has already returned to the south, so why are these South Stream Temple disciples still remaining here? Around the library, the teachers and students of the Orthodox Academy were cleaning up while Su Moyu was arranging for the reconstruction. Only when he was alerted by a priest at his side did he notice Chun Changsheng's figure. He knew why Prince Chen Lu had come, so he said directly, "The headmaster is not here." Prince Chen Lu thought to himself, "If it were me, I probably wouldn't want to see anyone from the Chen imperial family either." "Then I'll wait," he said to Su Moyu. Su Moyu replied, "Right now, there are many important matters in the imperial court that rely heavily on your highness. If your highness has something to say, just leave a message. There is no need to waste time here." Prince Chen Lu understood the hidden meaning in Su Moyu's words. With a somewhat bitter smile, he said, "Just think of it as seeking peace of mind for myself." Prince Chen Lu's temperament was noble and unsullied, and his words were worth 1,000 gold. If he said he would wait, then he would really wait. Holding a cup of tea, he sat under a tree by the lake and smiled in response to the curious gazes of the disciples of South Stream Temple. Only when dusk fell did Chun Changsheng finally return. The disciples of South Stream Temple and the teachers and students of the Orthodox Academy knew that the two definitely had something to say, so they very consciously left. Prince Chen Lu held his teacup and looked at the grass and the fallen leaves at his feet. After a long period of silence, he asked, "Can I go to the Empress's tomb to pay my respects?" Chen Prince was of the Bai of Chun of Chun of Chun had. Chun and Chun. Chun of Chun King. Chun Changsheng thought it over, then asked, "In those 10-some years, your life must have been very bitter, right?" Prince Chen Lu froze, then bitterly smiled. As expected of Chun Changsheng, he didn't need to deliberately do anything. He only needed to look at the truest depths to use the simplest of words to expose the entire truth. Correct. In those years, the Empress treated me very well, and the people of the palace also treated me with great respect, but I truly did live a very bitter life. Prince Chen Lu bowed and placed his cup on the grass, continuing, "Because my surname is Chun." Chun Changsheng looked into his eyes. "So no matter how she treated you, you still wanted her dead?" Prince Chen Lu very seriously pondered this question, then replied, "Perhaps it's because I never understood just what sort of person she was, so I was very afraid of her." Chun Changsheng thought it over, then expressed his agreement. "I also didn't understand her." Prince Chen Lu earnestly said, "But now you're standing on her side. You know, I'm speaking of the spiritual plane." Chun Changsheng did not explain, asking, "Your Highness, why have you come to find me?" Prince Chen Lu replied, "I want to pay my respects to her." Chun Changsheng used silence to express his stance. He would not tell anyone where he had buried the Tianhai Divine Empress. even if Prince Chen-Lu had been raised by the Divine Empress. The state of Ping has been taken back to the Tianhai clan, Prince Chen-Lu suddenly said. This was something Chen Changsheng did not care about, but he knew that since Prince Chen-Lu had brought this up, there was assuredly a reason. Besides the throne, the entire world hasn't changed much. There's an ugly side, but there's also a warm and affectionate side. Prince Chen-Lu looked at him and said, "Perhaps this world has wronged you, but I do not wish for you to lose all hope in this world." Not long ago, the Pope had expressed similar thoughts in the library. Chen Changsheng asked, "Just what does your Highness want to say?" Prince Chen-Lu replied, "Do you still remember the words Archbishop Mei Sha said to us before he died?" Chen Changsheng's thoughts returned to that room filled with plum blossoms, thought of that wrinkled old man, and fell silent for a very long time. "The Archbishop said to me to remember what you paid." Prince Chen-Lu continued, "At the time, none of us knew what these words meant, but now we do. Ripening, fruit, sacrifice. Many of the obscure words Mei Sha had mentioned before had been answered after the coup of the Mausoleum of Books. In order to overthrow the Tianhai Divine Empress's rule, people had used Chen Changsheng. For this, he had paid many things, some indescribably important things. If words had to be used to explain them, they would probably be trust, hope, a sense of existence, and emotions. I don't know what Principal Shang thinks, what Father thinks, what uncles and brothers think, but what the Chen clan owes you, I will return to you in their place." Prince Chen-Lu looked into his eyes and seriously said, "I will do everything in my power to guarantee your safety and interests." Chen Changsheng replied, "Thank you." He was very calm, even somewhat wooden, but his body still felt a sliver of warmth. Prince Chen-Lu continued, "I can understand your feelings, but I hope that you can quickly pull yourself together. Today, His Holiness the Pope has given you so much support. If you give up or leave, how will His Holiness face his millions of believers? What will the teachers and students of the Orthodox Academy do? What will His Majesty do?" Chen Changsheng thought of the words Eunuch Lin had said during the day and felt rather tired. He said, "I believe that this was not a problem I needed to think about." Prince Chen-Lu said, "If the rumors are true that you and His Majesty really are like brothers, then this is a problem you must think about." Chapter 681. Starting from 3 days ago, the Emperor of the Great Zhou was no longer the Tianhai Divine Empress, but a young man called Chen Yu. He was the only son of Emperor Xian and the Divine Empress, and also the Crown Prince Zhaoming, who had mysteriously disappeared 20 years ago. He was the student that the venerable Taoist master of the orthodoxy, Shang Xingzhou, had painstakingly raised for 20 years. He was the sovereign that 14 princes of the Chen clan and the Tianhai clan had sworn their support to. What problem could he have? Chen Changxing knew that there was a problem in the imperial palace, but if the person he was talking to was Tang 36, he might have spoken. Otherwise, he would have maintained his silence. Prince Chen-Lu misunderstood his silence. He thought of that young man who had quietly sat on the throne in the imperial court, his face devoid of sorrow or joy. He felt his chest become a little stuffy, and his voice unconsciously became a little tough. He said to Chen Changsheng, "You should be well aware that his handicap will become an outlet for many people's ambitions." Chen Changsheng lowered his head and said, "With Master and Eunuch Lin, neither your father nor the Prince of Zhongshan would dare break their promise. Moreover, the Tianhai clan will assuredly support him." Just because he had not expressed any opinion on the situation in the imperial court did not mean that he had not thought about it, did not mean that he had no insight in this aspect. As His Majesty's maternal family, the Tianhai clan would assuredly play this role. Otherwise, that night, when they coldly watched her die, would become a joke. Prince Chen-Lu stared into Chen Changxing's eyes and said, "You are not His Majesty. You cannot understand the pressure he is currently under." Chen Changxing replied, "Senior is not a person who likes to be emperor. His pressure does not come from those ambitious people, but from the throne itself." Prince Chen-Lu thought, there is no one in the world who does not want to be emperor. Even though Chen Changsheng had experienced the coup of the Mausoleum of Books, he was still rather naive and immature. He couldn't help but sigh. Their conversation had already reached a rather deep level, but Qin Changsheng was still unwilling to respond. He had no choice but to pat Qin Changsheng on the shoulder to comfort him. Then he left the Orthodox Academy. That night, many people died in the royal palace. In the following 2 days, many people continued to die. Whether it was the head eunuch whose name Chun Chong Sheng still didn't know, or the little palace maids in the Qiufang Palace who originally didn't have a name, they all became ghosts. Then, like bloodstains that were wiped clean, they were gradually forgotten by everyone. But even though such a major event had occurred and so many people had died, the imperial palace was not thrown into chaos. This was because Shang Xingzhou, who had schemed for many years, had long ago made his preparations. He had invited back many elders of the imperial palace. These elders were either attendants of the previous imperial palace or old people of Emperor Xian, like Eunuch Lin. They had once been forced out of the capital by the Tianhai Divine Empress's might, but now they had all returned. Grand Tutor Baiying had also returned. The autumn wind blew in from outside the hall, ruffling his white hair, but not a single wrinkle on his aged face. He was currently reading through the comments on the dossiers. They were all written in cinnabar red. The characters were rather delicate, but they did not lose their strength of style, and one could faintly see their tenacity. As for the opinions written, they were often only a few simple sentences, but they were extremely insightful and experienced. They left the imperial court, the ministers, and even the local officials of the provinces and counties enough space to act. This was the case for one dossier, and this was the case for 10 some dossiers. Baiying could no longer maintain his calm and dignified demeanor. He raised his head and gazed at the desk beside him. The young Taoist priest of Xining village had already become the young emperor of the Great Zhou dynasty. The change in status had not caused him to change much from before. He quietly sat behind the desk, calmly flipping through a book. Occasionally, he would take up a cinnabar brush and write something on it. It was like he was still in Xining village's old temple, reading the Taoist canon and writing down what he had learned. He was reading the dossiers of the Great Zhou dynasty over the years. What he wanted to do was analyze, judge, and make decisions like the previous emperors. He was following the Grand Tutor and learning how to rule a country. The Grand Tutor's eyes were slightly moist as he felt boundless sorrow. He thought, the son of Emperor Xian and the Empress is truly extraordinary, a natural-born hero. Alas, his gaze fell on the young emperor's leg, his left sleeve, and that lock of black hair. After a moment of silence, he sighed and thought, how could there be a perfect thing in this world? Dusk had already arrived. Today's lesson was over, and the Grand Tutor rose to leave. With the support of a eunuch, the young emperor rose with some difficulty and very properly bowed in the manner of a disciple. The Grand Tutor withdrew from the hall. The eunuch whispered a few questions, but the young emperor shook his head, his expression warm. Whether it was the eunuch or the serving maids, they once again let out a sigh of relief. In the past few days, too many people had died in the imperial palace and too much blood had been shed. When they saw that the newly ascended emperor was blind in one eye, missing an arm, and limping as he walked, they truly despaired. They had seen far too many abnormal people and knew that these kinds of people often had violent and terrifying temperaments. Personally serving such an emperor, if they were the slightest bit displeased, they would be severely punished. They had even mentally prepared themselves and their companions to be beaten to death. How could they have imagined that in the past 2 days, let alone getting angry, His Majesty did not even utter a single harsh word? They had never seen such a gentle master before. Even the young Prince Chunlu, who had been raised in the imperial palace, would occasionally throw a little tantrum. Those who remembered the divine empress in their hearts had to admit that for the great Zhou to welcome such a sovereign, at least to them, it was the best thing possible. The young emperor began to eat. There were many dishes, but he only ate the bland ones. He only ate a few chopsticks of greasy food and drank only half a bowl of soup. At the end of the meal, a young eunuch presented a thick black tea to aid digestion. The emperor shook his head, indicating that drinking some water was fine. The eunuch obeyed and brought the water, then retreated. Standing in the corridor outside the hall, He thought to himself, just who does His Majesty resemble? Emperor Xian or the Divine Empress? No, His Majesty's diet and health were very similar to only one person, Chen Changsheng. To be more accurate, Chen Changsheng was very similar to him. In the old temple of Xining village for 14 years, it was always him who cooked. He cooked according to Chen Changsheng's preferences and needs. Chen Changsheng's personality, Chen Changsheng's preferences, and Chen Changsheng's favorite dishes all came from him. Chen Changsheng had originally been raised by him. He walked out of the hall, stood on the stone steps, and gazed at the palace walls in the twilight. He knew that Chen Changsheng was there. The distance was actually not far, only a few hundred zhang. Close in front of him, but far away because they could not meet. There was naturally a reason why they could not meet. In the blood-like twilight, Shang Xingzhou's figure seemed to be plated in a strange color. He stood outside a window at the side of the hall for some time, quietly watching the emperor. The young emperor looked in the direction of the Orthodox Academy in silence for a very long time. Then he turned and bowed to the wooden window. Shang Xingzhou very seriously returned the bow. Teacher and student were separated by a window. There was nothing between the window, only emptiness, but this did not mean that there was truly nothing. They were teacher and student, and also ruler and minister. The autumn wind blew over the dew platform. As the darkness deepened, the night pearls on the edge of the platform grew brighter and brighter. Shang Xingzhou stood on the edge of the platform with his hands held behind his back. He gazed at the streets of the capital, at this world that he had not seen for a very long time, but was no stranger to. He calmly said, "Last night, the Prince of Zhongshan told Minister Cui that he is also Emperor Taizong's grandson of the first wife. Today, everyone knew that he was Emperor Taizong's most trusted minister. Everything he did was to fulfill Emperor Taizong's dying wish." The Prince of Zhongshan's words seemed rather inexplicable and ambiguous, but they were actually very clear. Since he was also Emperor Taizong's grandson of the first wife, Shang Xingzhou was completely capable of supporting him. There was no need for him to support the young emperor. The word grandson cannot be used carelessly. A voice came from behind the dew platform. Shang Xingzhou did not turn around. He indifferently said, "It seems that you have some different thoughts." That person fell silent for a very long time, then said, "It would be too fake to say that I don't have any thoughts, but I'm keenly aware that this is not something that I should be thinking about right now." Shang Xingzhou's expression did not change, but there was much more satisfaction in his eyes. This person was very young, dressed in a blue robe with a bright yellow belt tied around his waist. His face was delicate and handsome. It was Prince Qianlu. Shang Xingzhou turned around and asked, "Then what do you want to say?" Prince Qianlu replied, "Chen Changsheng is preparing to leave." When the Pope had gone to the Orthodox Academy, he had also believed that Chen Changsheng had already left or was packing his luggage. Chen Changsheng had not done this, but this did not mean that he had no thoughts of leaving. Shang Xingzhou fell silent for a very long time, then said, "I will not let him leave." Prince Qianlu asked, "Just what is the meaning in Sir's insistence on keeping him in the capital?" Shang Xingzhou did not directly answer this question. "In my life, there are two things that I must accomplish. The first has already been accomplished." If the Pope were present, he would know that the first thing he spoke of was to overthrow the Tianhai Divine Empress's rule, and the second was to completely defeat the demons. Prince Qianlu did not know, so he was even more confused as to why he had suddenly mentioned these things. At this moment, several extremely clear cracks suddenly appeared in the twilight sky. Soon after, several shrill bird cries resounded through the world. 10 red geese and 4 red falcons had returned from the distant snowy plains of the north. Only 3 red geese and 2 red falcons had returned to the capital. They brought with them a piece of news that everyone had been perplexed about and had been waiting for. Shuilao City was still sealed. The demon military advisor Blackrobe and the demon commander had joined hands in rebellion. Great chaos. The blizzard had become a disaster. 7 demon generals had died. Nank had fled into the snowstorm. The demon lord's fate was unknown. Tomorrow was rather busy, so there was no update. Chapter 682. In the last chapter, I had Urin say a few words, and Snow sent me a message asking if it was a bug. I thought about it and admitted that it was, then made some changes. Then, I will be rather busy in the coming days. As for the specifics, I will explain it to you in a few days. If I have time, I will write. If not, then I can only apologize. I wish everyone happiness and good health. The gates of the imperial city were tightly shut. The divine generals, ministers, and princes in the capital had already arrived at the palace. Mao Chuyu and Daoist Baishur had also hurried over from the Li Palace. As time passed, more and more information arrived from the snowy plains to the south. The news that could shake the entire continent and bring about countless upheavals gradually became more detailed, more vivid. 3 days ago, on the night of the coup of the Mausoleum of Books in the capital, a world-shaking event also occurred in Shualao City. The demon commander suddenly raised the flag of rebellion and led the army in an assault on the demon palace. The demon lord was ambushed by the demon military advisor Blackrobe and a hidden expert of the Council of Elders. He was heavily injured and fell into the nether spring, with no chance of survival. Demon Princess Nank used the secret technique of exploding blood to forcefully break through the barrier of the demon palace. Transforming into a peacock, she flew southeast, borrowing the wind and snow to successfully escape. 7 demon generals loyal to the demon lord and tens of thousands of demon cavalry were killed or executed in this rebellion. The streets of Shualao City were covered in the color of blood, like a blue wave, striking fear into the hearts of all. Afterwards, Blackrobe and the demon commander, upon the ascension of the demon lord's youngest son to the throne, issued several demon decrees, requiring all the tribes and armies of the demon race to swear their loyalty. At the same time, they issued the order to kill Nank. What was going on here? The dukes of the Great Zhou in the hall looked at each other. Even though they had already verified the authenticity of this news through many different channels, they still found it hard to believe. The greatest enemy of the human race in the last 1,000 years, that devil that had once enveloped the north like a shadow, that not even Emperor Taizong had been able to kill, had actually died like this? Yes, 1,000 years ago, the demon lord lost to Zhou Dufu and was heavily injured. This year, in order to break the array of the Elder of Heavenly Secrets, he had also consumed a great deal of essence blood. Very few people knew that on the demon lord's return to Shualao City, he had encountered the White Emperor. Presumably, that world-shaking battle had also aggravated his injuries. So how could he have died? The most incomprehensible thing was, how could he have died in a rebellion? In order to find a faction within the demon race to overthrow the demon lord, it would definitely not be the Council of Elders, nor could it be those tribes that had already been killed to the core. It could only be the demon commander who controlled a considerable number of demon armies and possessed abnormally terrifying strength, as well as the mysterious and unfathomable Blackrobe, who had secretly cultivated an unknown number of factions. Moreover, it had to be them working together. The problem was that even storytellers with the most exaggerated imaginations did not dare to think in this direction. The entire world knew that the demon military advisor Blackrobe and the demon commander were like fire and water. If not for the demon lord's personal suppression and mediation, the two sides would never have been able to coexist. This couldn't be fake, because this situation had been maintained for hundreds of years. Then just who was it that could make Blackrobe and the demons put aside their former enmity, take such a massive risk, place such great trust in each other, and work together to launch such a sinister and terrifying attack against the demon lord? The crowd subconsciously turned their gazes to a certain place. It was an unremarkable corner of the great hall, very quiet and secluded. There were no eunuchs or maids standing there, only a row of beaded curtains. As the autumn wind blew, the beaded curtains silently swayed, and one could faintly make out the scene behind them. There were no seats behind the curtains, but a long corridor. This long corridor led to a very ordinary room at the back of the hall. Many years ago, those legendary ministers depicted in the portraits of the Lingyan Pavilion were used to drinking tea, playing chess, and cursing in that room, passing the boring time before the court session. Now, Emperor Taizong's soul had long since returned to the Sea of Stars, and those legendary ministers had long since followed him. No one dared to be so relaxed in the imperial palace, nor would anyone deliberately be so magnanimous. The vast majority of people had even forgotten those stories that had occurred in that ordinary room. There was one person who had not forgotten because he was a person of that era. He had not ascended to the Lingyan Pavilion because he did not have the fame of those legendary ministers. But in truth, in that era, he had been more important than the vast majority of the people in the Lingyan Pavilion. This was because before those legendary ministers died, before they were painted on paper by Taoist Wu, he had seen them with his own eyes. From another perspective, those legendary ministers had all been sent to the Lingyan Pavilion by him. He was now in that ordinary room. Perhaps he was reminiscing about those former comrades, or perhaps he was reporting something to Emperor Taizong. In the coup of the Mausoleum of Books, the Tianhai Divine Empress had once asked who would resolve the thread of the demons. Shang Xingzhou had said that he could resolve it. Han Qing believed that he could resolve it. So he had thrown the Frost God's spear and completed the autumn slaying. 3 days had passed. The demon lord truly had died. Shuelao City had fallen into chaos, and Shang Xingzhou had proved his words. At this time, Han Qing was perhaps hurrying to Shuelao City. Would the once demonic crown prince watch as his younger brother ascended to the throne of the demon lord? The important figures in the hall stared speechlessly at the silently swaying beaded curtains. They could not see Shang Xingzhou's figure, but their eyes were still brimming with reverence. When there were clouds, the lights of the capital would dim a little, so the darkness of the night could not be too thick. When there were no clouds, the stars in the sky would illuminate the world, but the darkness of the night still could not be too thick. In short, in a bustling place like the capital, it was very difficult to see an extremely thick darkness of the night, much less a pitch-black darkness, unless a torrential downpour forced people to put out their own lights. The starlight was scattered by the flying red geese and several extremely valuable heaven patrol carriages. Chun Changsheng stood on the great banyan tree, inexplicably beginning to reminisce about that torrential downpour from 3 days ago. Perhaps it was because 3 days ago, many things had not happened. At the time, he still had the chance to pretend that his life was peaceful and beautiful, just like 3 years ago when he and Luoluo were in the Orthodox Academy. Yet 1 year ago, Tang 36 had said to him on this great banyan tree that there was a problem with his teacher, that many people had problems, and that he needed to think carefully about these problems. Chun Changsheng had thought about these problems, but he did not have the ability or the wisdom to resolve them. Tang 36 had left, forcefully brought back to Wenshui by the Tang clan. It was unknown whether he would ever return. Su Yurong had left, forcefully escorted back to Holy Maiden Peak by the Tianhai Divine Empress's MOU. It was unknown what sort of storm this city would stir when she returned to the capital. Zhixiu had left, like a true lone wolf vanishing into the darkness and lights of the capital. However, he was definitely still in the capital, though it was unknown what he was preparing to do. What truly made Qin Changsheng feel somewhat lonely, or perhaps sad, was Zhou Tong was still alive. He already knew the complete picture of the coup of the Mausoleum of Books. That small courtyard with the crabapple trees had been destroyed, but Zhou Tong had managed it very well, and he had even poisoned Xue Xingchuan to death. The change in the situation in the capital began from the moment the imperial design lost its effectiveness. It could be said that Zhou Tong had played the most important role. He had betrayed the Tianhai Divine Empress. Qin Changsheng could accept this. This was because Zhixiu was a wolf, while Zhou Tong was a dog. A wolf traveled 1,000 li to eat meat, while a dog was a bastard. However, Su Shiji had also betrayed them. Even the Tianhai clan had betrayed them. This was hard for Qin Changsheng to accept. It had nothing to do with one's stance or faction. It was just hard to accept. This sort of world was truly too inexplicable. It was truly impossible for him to like this sort of inexplicable world. Chapter 683. That inexplicable world had its own rules of operation. It was rigid, monotonous, and repetitive. Even if a few unexpected circumstances occasionally appeared, If one looked deeper, it was still a rehash of those old events. Whether it was under the sun or under the stars, there was nothing new. Conspiracies and betrayals were filled with a nauseating stench of decay. Young people who were still filled with expectations and hope for this world, who still had the courage to look straight into the darkness under the sun, who looked up to morality under the stars, naturally had no good opinion of this kind of world, such as Tang 36. But in the eyes of the second master of the One Shui Tangs who liked to laugh silently, in the eyes of the elders of the Tianhai clan, in the eyes of Zhou Tong, the thoughts of young people were always so childish and laughable. Life could not be a game of playing house. Chen Changsheng could even imagine how many similar words Tang 36 would hear on the journey back to Wenshui from the capital. He could also imagine that at this moment, in the divine general of the East Estate, the solemn and righteous Su Shiji, after removing the dishes from the table, would plausibly say to his wife, "As a father, everything I do is for the sake of my daughter. If it weren't for me acting decisively and turning the tide after the divine empress died, do you think she would still be able to sit stably on the position of holy maiden?" The starlight scattered and the darkness deepened. There was a sudden disturbance in front of the Orthodox Academy, and then Su Mo Yu hurried to the lakeside and told him the news. The news from Shuilao City was truly shocking. Shin Changsheng was silent for a very long time. The demon lord's death was an extremely good thing for him. In the garden of Zhou, he and Su Yurong had almost been killed several times by Nake. He did not have any good opinion of that rather open-minded little demon princess. But when he thought of how this once mortal enemy had disappeared like a splash in this magnificent upheaval, he could not help but feel a little lost. "Leave the capital. This is the best choice," Su Imoyu said to him. Shin Changsheng understood what he meant. The demon lord's death and the internal strife of the demons had allowed Shang Xingzhou, who had arranged everything, to ascend to the altar. Before the memories of humanity had completely faded, no one would have the courage to resist him. Today, the Pope had used an extremely unyielding stance to protect him and the Orthodox Academy, but he could only maintain a balance. But just as the Pope had said, he was already old, on the verge of death. If that day truly came, how would Chen Changsheng face that person? That person would become a god of the entire continent, and he would also be his teacher. Chen Changsheng once again remained silent for a long time. He really did want to leave the capital. During the time he had been sitting in the library, he had wanted to pack his luggage several times, but in the end, he had given up. He knew he could not leave, because that man would not allow him to leave his sight until he died. Yuren also knew this, so he quietly remained in the imperial palace as his own emperor. Chen Changsheng silently waited for time to pass in the Tradition Academy. They were the people in the world who understood Shang Xingzhou the most, even more so than the Pope. In the past, their teacher was just an ordinary Taoist, but now he was a Tao Lord. However, regardless of whether it was an ordinary Taoist or supreme Taoist Lord, they were all their masters. On the fourth day after the coup of the Mausoleum of Books, another shocking piece of news came from Mount Han. The Elder of Heavenly Secrets had peacefully passed away in a small house by the Heaven Lake. This leader of the storms of the 8 directions, an elder of the same generation as the Pope and Shang Xingzhou, was ultimately unable to resist time and pain. His soul returned to the Sea of Stars. After being shaken by this news for a few moments, the capital once more fell into an orderly state of chaos. It was said to be chaotic because people were dying and families were being confiscated everywhere. It was said to be orderly because all of this was carried out under the imperial court's powerful control. Whether it was the scope or the intensity, the majority of people could endure it, and it was also not at a level that would arouse too much ill will from the populace. Some of the ministers of the Tianhai government had died, and the vast majority of those who had been imprisoned had already been released. Only a few diehards were still bitterly holding on, perhaps able to hold out until the autumn to be executed. Perhaps because Chun Guansong had been burned to death by the Tianhai Divine Empress's true flames of the Heavenly Phoenix, or because Han Qing's true identity had been exposed and he had left the capital. The Great Zhou dynasty was unable to find a general of sufficient seniority to hold the line. Fierce battles would occasionally break out in the armies of the provinces and counties, so the purge of the army was correspondingly even more cruel and fierce. The rebellion in Shualao City had caused the deaths of 7 demon generals, while the Great Zhou dynasty had already lost 8 divine generals, and several more divine generals had become disheartened and retired to their fields. Most chilling of all was that, according to the decree issued from the palace, the corpses of divine General Xue Xingchuan and those generals of the Imperial Guard loyal to the Tianhai Divine Empress were still displayed on the official road outside the city, forbidden from being buried. The entire world knew that Divine General Xue Xingchuan and Divine General Tian Shui were the Tianhai Divine Empress's left and right arms, her most loyal subordinates. Divine General Tian Shui's corpse had already transformed into smoke, returning to the heavens with the Tianhai Divine Empress. But Xue Xingchuan could not receive the same treatment. Putting aside the fact that Xue Xingchuan had fiercely resisted the demon army in the Northern Army headquarters and performed an enormous service for the Great Zhou dynasty, even if he was just an ordinary general, why would he have to endure such humiliation after his death? Many people felt that this was wrong, but they did not dare to oppose it, because this was a decree issued from the imperial palace. Moreover, everyone knew that this was the unyielding response of some important figure to a certain rumor in the capital. In that rumor, Xue Xingchuan had died to Zhou Tong's scheme. Zhou Tong had betrayed the Tianhai Divine Empress and also betrayed his only friend. As this rumor spread, the loathing and contempt the people felt for Zhou Tong reached a new height. At this moment, the decree from the imperial palace appeared. The corpses of Xue Xingchuan and those generals of the Imperial Guard were exposed. These powerful figures wanted to use this callous display to tell the people of the world that as long as they were willing to sever ties with the Tianhai Divine Empress, they would obtain their benevolence and unyielding protection. They did not even hesitate to use this method of humiliating the dead to express their will and support Zhou Tong. There had always been a saying in the continent: if Zhou Tong died, only one person would come to collect his corpse, and that person was called Xue Xingchuan. Now, Xue Xingchuan was dead at Zhou Tong's hand, and because of Zhou Tong, he had died without a burial. This made people scorn, and many people began to get angry, but the entire capital remained absolutely silent. Perhaps it was because the news of the Elder of Heavenly Secrets' death had made the common people think of the words the Pope had said that night in the coup of the Mausoleum of Books. He was also old and about to die. If even the Pope died, who could endure the rage of that venerable Taoist master? There were people who could endure it, or perhaps she had never even considered whether she could endure it, because she was Xue Xingchuan's wife. In the early morning, Madame Xue walked out of the city gate for the 4th time. She arrived on the official road and gazed at the corpses of the dead that had been carelessly placed on the ground. She still could not tell which one was her husband. Then she turned to the supervisor of the Ministry of Justice responsible for watching over the corpses and said, "My lord, greetings. I wish to replace my late husband." Her face was somewhat pale, her expression exhausted, and her lips dry, but her expression was still calm, exuding a sense of awe. The supervisor of the Ministry of Justice did not let her finish. There was a crisp crack of a whip. A corner of Madame Xue's skirt was torn. Perhaps because he had been intimidated by Madame Xue's calm and awe-inspiring aura, and thus felt somewhat humiliated, the supervisor's voice was somewhat shrill, extremely unpleasant to hear. Xue Xingchuan followed the Demon Empress and rebelled against the law. Convicted of treason, his corpse shall be exposed for 10 days and then fed to the dogs. Chapter 684. Madame Xue was not frightened to the ground, nor was she angered. She softly said to the supervisor of the Ministry of Justice, "There is no such rule in the laws of the Great Zhou." The supervisor of the Ministry of Justice saw that she was not willing to retreat and was still so calm, making him even angrier. He indicated for his subordinates to drive her away and scolded, "You old hag, if you don't scram and continue to obstruct this official from carrying out his official duties, don't blame this official for being impolite. When the time comes, you better not be afraid of pain." This was an undisguised threat. No matter how firm Madame Xue's personality was, she could not overcome the spears in the hands of the soldiers. She gloomily prepared to leave when she suddenly felt that these words were somewhat familiar. She glanced at the supervisor of the Ministry of Justice and realized that he was somewhat familiar. Somewhat unsure, she asked, "Have I seen you somewhere before?" The supervisor's complexion instantly turned nasty as he harshly yelled, "Drive this person away from me." The soldiers of the city gate department walked forward, preparing to drive Madame Shui away. Madame Shui suddenly remembered. Looking at that person with a slightly strange expression, she asked, "You are Tian Haisheng?" The supervisor's complexion paled, and his voice became even sharper as he yelled at the crowd. "What are you trash waiting for?" Hearing this, the soldiers of the city gate department no longer dared to delay. Raising their weapons, they prepared to descend upon Madame Shui in an attempt to scare her away. But Madame Shui seemed not to see these cold swords and sabers. She only stared at the supervisor of the Ministry of Justice outside the crowd, her face carrying ridicule and a hint of pain. She truly had seen this person before, in her own estate. This person was a distant relative of the Tianhai clan. Relying on his relationship with the Tianhai clan, he had pestered and begged for a way to enter her estate. He had treated Shui Xingchuan and her with incomparable respect, and had even gifted them precious gifts, all for the sake of obtaining a job. Shui Xingchuan had never accepted gifts, and she was no different. However, in the end, she had still helped this person with this matter. After all, it was not a major matter. Several years had passed, and it seemed like this person had managed the ministry well. He had actually managed to become a supervisor, and he had not been implicated in any way. Even now, he was still entrusted with heavy responsibilities by the imperial court. Thinking of this person's face from back then and thinking of this person's face today, Madame Shui only felt that it was rather ironic. In the purge of Jingdo over the past few days, the people with the most intense attitudes and the most vicious methods were not the old officials who had rebelled against Tianhai for many years, nor were they the princes of the Chen family. Rather, it was the officials of the Tianhai court who had once appeared to be the most loyal and devoted, the subordinates of the once most arrogant Tianhai family. This was a bit crazy, inconceivable, but in reality, countless years of history had always been like this. After a major event, the people who behaved the craziest and often did the most inconceivable things were the traitors. It seemed that only through this almost hysterical performance could they prove that their current loyalty was different from their previous loyalty. Only then could they convince themselves that they did not have to worry about being abandoned by the new ruler. Only then could they obtain freedom from fear. This supervisor of the Ministry of Justice was like this. The city gate department was like this. Several eunuchs in the palace were like this. The subordinates of the Tianhai clan were like this. And Zhou Tong was also like this. It was said that in the early hours of that day, Zhou Tong had received the treatment of the sacred light technique. His heavy injuries had just begun to recover, and he immediately gathered his subordinates in the department for purging officials and began to oversee matters, protecting and escorting the new government. As she thought of these rumors and looked at the supervisor of the Ministry of Justice, the derision in Madame Shui's smile grew thicker and thicker, more and more dazzling. The supervisor felt like his eyes were about to be dazzled, suddenly filled with malice. He no longer had anyone drive her away. He yelled, "Seize her for me." The Li Palace. Mao Qiu looked at the Pope watering the green leaf and said, "The temple seminary has finished taking stock and all the students have returned. The Li Palace Academy has 2 students that have been sent to Zhou prison. In a little while, Si Yuan will personally go and get them. The Green Mantis is relatively quiet, and all the gates of the Heavenly Tao Academy have been closed. No students have been able to leave, but the Orthodox Academy has ignored them." The green leaf in the pot was clearly one less leaf than before, but it seemed to be missing a great deal, giving off a somewhat empty feeling. Without turning his head, the Pope said, "Since these matters have been taken care of, go and send General Shui off." Mao Qiu assented, then turned and walked out of the hall. After a while, he turned back and said, "Someone has gone." The Pope paused, then asked, "Who has gone?" Mao Qiu replied, "That person." The Pope was somewhat confused, saying, "That child has a kind heart, but his personality is not so straightforward." Mao Qiuyu shook his head. It said that he just happened to be passing by. After meditating in the library for 3 days, Chun Changsheng received eunuch Lin, Prince Chen Lu, and the Pope as visitors. Chen Changsheng only knew what had happened that night, not what had happened in the capital in the past few days. At the time, he and Sumwayu had been strolling through the capital. He had come out to stroll because the situation in the capital was gradually calming down. He had sat in the library for too long, and both his body and mind were somewhat sluggish. Moreover, he was keenly aware that while it was very difficult for him to leave the capital, it did not mean that he could not leave the Orthodox Academy. Most importantly, he wanted to find out where Zhishio was. The leaves fell into the Luo River, lightly swaying. He was just like these leaves, aimlessly walking. Perhaps because he was following the thoughts in the depths of his heart, he and Sumwayu walked just like this out of the city gate. This was also because the capital had never had any city walls to begin with, so the city gate was too inconspicuous. The willow trees lining the official road formed 2 perfectly straight green lines. In this bleak autumn day, it was very delightful. If not for those cries and clamor, if not for that blood and that stench. Chen Changsheng saw the bloodstains on the official road and the black flies in the fields beyond it. It was already a very cold autumn, yet there were still swarms of black flies. It was truly annoying, just like those murderous soldiers of the city gate department and those officials. Many people of the capital were present. Through the respectful discussions and shameful curses of the crowd, Chen Changsheng and Su Imo, you were able to quickly understand the whole story. He walked forward and saw that tired, haggard, weak, yet determined, calm, and brave woman at the very front of the crowd. It was Xue Xingchuan's wife. And then he saw those determined and brave soldiers, their bodies covered in blood and heavily injured, their eyes showing no remorse, only anger and unwillingness. They were Xue Xingchuan's soldiers. Just a moment ago, just when a supervisor of the Ministry of Justice ordered his subordinates to deal a fatal blow to Madame Xue, some soldiers suddenly charged out of the city gate. These soldiers had come from the Tsong Province Army and had returned to the capital for the autumn break after receiving commendation. The Tsong Province Army was where Xue Xingchuan had made his fortune and also where he had fought against the demons and rendered the most military service. Xue Xingchuan had been back in the capital for many years, so he naturally did not recognize these ordinary soldiers. But these soldiers had not forgotten their general. They had been waiting in secret this entire time, preparing to find a chance to steal Xue Xingchuan's remains and bury them. Only when Madame Xue was in danger did they find it impossible to continue hiding. The chaos quickly came to an end. Madame Xue was somewhat frightened, but she was not injured. The soldiers from the Tsong Province Army had suffered grievous casualties, an appalling sight to behold. A deputy general from the City Gate Department looked at the wounded soldiers of the Tsong Province Army and sternly yelled, "Divine General Xue, he has already been captured and will be escorted back to the capital in a few days for trial. You muddle-headed soldiers actually dared to defy the decree and injure him. Are you plotting a rebellion?" Madame Xue's voice trembled, but she still said rudely, "General, we only want to bury the corpse, not rebel." The deputy general looked at her in silence, then said, "Madam, anyone who dares to bury the corpse of your esteemed husband is plotting a rebellion." The supervisor of the Ministry of Justice gave Madame Xue a mocking smile, suffused with a deep malice. This was a matter that everyone understood, but only now did someone clearly state it. The Tianhai Divine Empress was dead, Xue Xingchuan was dead, and Xue he was about to die in a few days. The second-ranked divine general of the great Zhou, whose name had once shaken the continent, was now nothing. With no place to bury his corpse, it became a display of the imperial court's strength, a sort of declaration against his murderer who had poisoned him to death. His widow would suffer all sorts of humiliation, ultimately drowning herself in water, hanging herself from a beam, or living a miserable life until she died of old age. His remnants would also not enjoy any glory, leaving them with only unforgettable memories and pain. After nightfall, I will deal with this matter. Su Moyu stopped Chen Changsheng and spoke in an unquestionable tone. Xue Xingchuan's miserable fate was a touchstone for the new dynasty, a log in front of the city gate. Su Moyu knew that since Chen Changsheng had seen it, he would assuredly deal with it, but Chen Changsheng's status was far too sensitive. If he took action, it was very easy for a major incident to occur, so Su Moyu decided to deal with it himself. From every angle, this was a very courageous and relatively safe arrangement, but Chen Changsheng did not think so. It had already been 4 days, so how could there be another day? He walked out of the crowd and arrived in front of Madame Xue. Greetings. Chapter 685. Madame Xue was a very cultured and courteous woman. Even though her husband's corpse had been tossed onto the plains outside the official road, and she was currently enduring endless grief and humiliation, she still did not lose her manners. Looking at this young man that she did not recognize, she softly asked, "May I ask what is the matter?" Chen Changsheng walked out of the crowd and came to stand in front of her. There was naturally something he needed to do, something that the imperial court currently forbade people from doing: collect Xue Xingchuan's corpse. Madame Xue was somewhat shocked at his answer, and then she became very moved. But she shook her head, a sad smile on her face. In the last few days, the capital had seemed absolutely silent, but in reality, there had still been voices crying out for injustice. However, those people were just like these soldiers from the Tsong province army, cruelly suppressed. She did not want this young man to experience the same thing. Before Chen Changsheng had time to say anything, he was interrupted by a cold and harsh voice. The speaker was the administrator of the Ministry of Justice, Tian Haisheng. He watched as this young man walked out of the crowd, ignoring the cold swords and sabers. When he heard the following conversation, he found it very laughable. Of course, he was also very angry. He did not know who this young man was, but when he saw the scholarly uniform he wore, he believed that he was the same type of person as those hot-blooded students of the 6 Ivies from 2 days ago. Some of your schoolmates have been sent to Zhou prison, others have been whipped several dozen times, and they are all imprisoned in their respective schools. He harshly yelled, "I didn't think that there would still be someone who would dare to make trouble. Are you blind?" At this moment, both sides of the official road were lined with cavalry from the City Gate Department and bailiffs from the Ministry of Justice, a dense mass of at least several hundred people. Those soldiers from the Tsong Province Army were naturally not weak in their own ranks, but before this array, they were unable to raise a single wave before collapsing with heavy injuries. If an ordinary student of the 6 Ivies were to stand out upon seeing this sight, they would truly be too hot-blooded, perhaps even reckless. In the view of an official like Tian Haisheng, this sort of student was naturally blind. It had been a very long time since Chen Changsheng had heard such words, not since that spring when he entered the Orthodox Academy. Whether it was the divine empress or the head of the Tianhai clan, or even the demon lord he had encountered at Mount Han, they would perhaps ignore him, but they would not treat him with such contempt. After all, his status was no longer the same. He didn't react in time, and as a result, he seemed a bit wooden. In Tian Haisheng's eyes, he seemed a bit stubborn. Tian Haisheng did not like stubborn people, because he had never been stubborn in his life, so he became angrier and angrier. He flicked his wrist. With a snap, the whip in his hand broke through the autumn wind and fell towards Chen Changsheng's face. He was angry and didn't have any intention of holding back. Looking at the strength of his attack, if it landed, an extremely deep wound would probably appear on Chen Changsheng's face. Moreover, he wasn't going to whip this young student once. He was going to whip this young student until he cried and rolled on the ground begging for mercy. Cries of alarm rose from the crowd at this sight. Madame Xue's face was snow-white. She wanted to pull Chen Changsheng away, but she was unable to do so. In the eyes of the crowd, Chen Changsheng was scared silly and only knew how to look at the whip. What was the use of this? Suddenly, the crisp sound of the whip disappeared. A crossbow bolt that had come out of nowhere had severed the whip in Tian Haisheng's hand. Tian Haisheng looked at the remaining half of the whip in his hand, speechless and shocked as he gazed into the distance. At this moment, Another crossbow bolt shot into his left eye socket, causing blood to spurt out. A howl of pain came from his mouth. The two sides of the official road outside the city gate were filled with the panicked shouts of the crowd and the sound of running footsteps. The scene was in utter chaos. At the front of the crowd, Tian Haisheng covered his injured eye, his face pale from pain. His entire body trembled as he waved the broken whip in his hand like a madman. Qin Changsheng held Madame Xue's arm and retreated 2 steps. The chaos did not last for long. The deputy general of the city gate department harshly shouted, ordering the bailiffs of the Ministry of Justice to brave the danger and snatch the whip from Tian Haisheng's hand, preparing to treat his injury. At the same time, the soldiers of the city gate department surrounded the scene. Whether it was the crowd watching the spectacle or the heavily injured soldiers of the Tsong province army, not a single one of them was allowed to leave. More cavalry rode into the surroundings, attempting to find the crossbowmen as quickly as possible. Qin Changsheng and Madame Xue stood on the official road. Their surroundings were completely empty, not a single person present. The deputy general of the city gate department rode on his horse and looked at Qin Changsheng. He seemed to want to say something, but in the end, he said nothing. Qin Changsheng glanced at him and knew that he had probably recognized who he was. But just a moment ago, he had only glanced at Tian Haisheng's whip before it had snapped. Soon after, Tian Haisheng's eye had been blinded by the crossbow bolt. In the eyes of the crowd, he was a demon, or perhaps an immortal. The soldiers of the city gate department naturally believed him to be a demon. When they saw him looking at their commander, they instantly became extremely nervous. Countless swords and sabers unsheathed, spears raised and ready to stab. The deputy general of the city gate department had a nasty complexion. He raised his hand to indicate that no one should move. Suma Yu finally squeezed out of the crowd. Seeing this sight, he breathed a sigh of relief and said, "Fortunately, you didn't act blindly without thinking." The deputy general of the city gate department replied, "It doesn't recognize Principal Chun and even says that Principal Chun is blind. Then he's blind, and his blindness serves him right." Qin Changsheng was naturally famous, but not many people had actually seen him up close, not even in the capital. But this deputy general was Su Shurji's subordinate, so he naturally paid a great deal of attention to Qin Changsheng and the Orthodox Academy, allowing him to recognize Qin Changsheng. He said to Qin Changsheng, "But I must warn sir, if sir insists on doing this, it really will." Qin Changsheng asked, "Will I also be accused of plotting rebellion?" The deputy general's complexion turned even nastier. He thought to himself, not even the Prince of Xiang would dare to place such a crime on the future pope. This lowly officer cannot make the decision on this matter. The city gate department was responsible for the security of the capital and was very important. Those who could make decisions here were naturally important figures deeply trusted by the imperial court and extremely experienced. For example, the divine general of the Eastern Fleet, Su Shurji, who had once been deeply trusted by the Tianhai Divine Empress and was now highly regarded by the Prince of Xiang. The crowd had already been driven far away. Upon learning of Qin Changsheng's identity, the somewhat absent-minded Madame Xue was helped to the side by Su Moyu to rest. There were very few people on the official road. This was because Su Shurji did not want his conversation with Qin Changsheng to be heard by too many people. 3 years had passed, and his relationship with Qin Changsheng had undergone a massive transformation. He could no longer use his status as uncle, nor could he use the dignity of a divine general to suppress Qin Changsheng. If Qin Changsheng insisted, he would even need to bow to him. To Su Shurji, this was a matter that he could not accept. "This is the decree of the palace. Not even you can defy it," he sternly said to Qin Changsheng, and then his expression softened as he continued. "In addition, are you very familiar with Xue Xingchuan?" Today's matter seemed like a minor matter, but in reality, it was an important matter for the new dynasty to establish its might. Su Shurji knew that he had encountered trouble, but he did not understand why Qin Changsheng would always come to make trouble for him. Could it be that Qin Changsheng still held a grudge for what happened back then and insisted on making him lose all face? He did not want to fall into that sort of situation. So he forcefully suppressed the anger in his heart and attempted to use gentle words to persuade Chen Changsheng. In the view of Su Shiji and many others, Chen Changsheng and Xue Xingchuan were not familiar with each other. In the past, they even had their own camps and were secretly enemies. There was no need for this battle. I am not familiar with Xue Xingchuan. Chen Changsheng looked at him and said, "But I hear that Sir is very familiar with him." Su Shiji's complexion was extremely unsightly. Xue Xingchuan and he were both the Tianhai Divine Empress's most trusted high officials of the military. The former was entrusted with the Imperial Guard while he was in charge of the City Gate Department. He was naturally very familiar with Xue Xingchuan. Not only were they colleagues, they had once been comrades. They were also comrades, friends. If Chen Changsheng was not familiar with Xue Xingchuan and did not have the duty and responsibility to bury Xue Xingchuan's body, then what about Su Shiji? Chen Changsheng did not think so much. He only spoke according to the thoughts in his heart, leaving Su Shiji speechless. After a very long time, he took a deep breath and said, "This is a decree." Chen Changsheng replied, "But it is unreasonable." Su Shiji coldly yelled, "A decree is the greatest principle of the world." Chen Changsheng shook his head and said, "If you're hungry, you have to eat. If you're tired, you have to sleep. If you're sick, you have to take medicine. If you're dead, you have to be buried. These are the greatest principles." Chapter 686. When hungry, eat. When tired, sleep. When sick, treat. When dead, bury. These were the principles of the heavens and the earth. What was the principles of the heavens and the earth? It was the greatest principle of the world. Chen Changsheng's voice was carried away by the autumn wind, causing the surrounding people to fall silent. Su Shiji had nothing to say, because in front of this principle, anything he said was unreasonable. Chen Changsheng walked towards the plains on the side of the official road, his clothes exuding a faint radiance that not even the beautiful light of the sky could conceal. Su Shiji's expression chilled. "You want to fight with me?" These words were not a threat, but also not a threat. It was more like a warning or a reminder. It had nothing to do with cultivation, nothing to do with authority. Chen Changsheng had clearly understood the underlying meaning. "I am Su Yorong's father. Are you sure you want to fight with me?" Before that snowy battle on the Bridge of Helplessness, whenever Chen Changsheng thought of Su Yorong, he would occasionally feel some sympathy or pity for her because she had a father like Su Shiji. At this moment, he actually felt that Su Shiji was also very pitiful. Of course, the meaning of the word pity was somewhat different, rather loathsome. He ignored it and walked straight into the plains. Su Moyu followed his orders, supporting Madame Xue as they waited on the official road. Many gazes fell on Su Shiji. The soldiers of the city gate department gripped their swords and spears, not knowing what to do next. Su Shiji knew that he could do nothing. That crossbow bolt that had blinded Tian Haisheng had clearly come from a divine crossbow. Although neither the bailiffs of the Ministry of Justice nor the cavalry of the City Gate Department had discovered that crossbowman, he was sure that the Orthodoxy cavalry were not far away. And in the alley deep within the city gate, he could already faintly make out the figures of several cardinals. Those cardinals quickly arrived, accompanied by many priests of the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education. The priests ignored Su Shiji's gaze and the changes in the expressions of the officials of the City Gate Department and the Ministry of Justice. They began to treat the wounded soldiers of the Tsong Province Army. The matters of the plains naturally had people to take over. Chen Changsheng returned to the official road. Madame Xue finally confirmed his identity. Somewhat shocked and moved, she sincerely said, "Thank you for your Holiness's kindness." Chen Changsheng replied, "There is no need for your Holiness to be so polite. I did not know of this matter. I just happened to see it when I came here." Madame Xue replied, "I'm only worried that this matter will affect your Holiness." Chen Changsheng said, "No problem." Su Shiji had been watching from the side with cold eyes the entire time. When he realized that he and Lady Xue did not know each other, he finally confirmed that there was no friendship between him and the Xue estate, which made him even more puzzled. For the sake of a corpse, he went against the will of the palace and went against his own teacher. Was it worth it? He looked at Chun Chong Sheng and said, I don't believe that you are doing this for the so-called reason. Chun Chong Sheng said, I'm not Wang Pe. Everything is straight. I chose to do this because it's beneficial to me. Su Shiji revealed a mocking smile, thinking that it was indeed so. What I cultivate is following my heart. Chun Chong Sheng continued, no matter what happens, I must act according to my heart. Otherwise, it will greatly affect my cultivation. What did it mean to follow one's heart? If he thought that Qin Shan was charming, then so be it. If he didn't like Qin Shan, then he would have to remove him. If the road ahead was smooth, then so be it. If the road was not smooth, he would naturally have to use his saber. If the scenery was beautiful, then he would enjoy it. If his eyes were filled with filthy smoke and miasma, how could he remain silent? Sumoyu sighed in praise. Following one's heart like this, how is it any different from Wang Po's path of the blade? Su Shiji finally asked, Are you really not afraid? Chun Chong Sheng did not answer this question. He turned and walked back into the capital. 4 days ago, he carried the Tianhai Divine Empress's body down from the Mausoleum of Books and buried it in the 100 Herb Garden. He had even done this, so what more Shui Xingchuan? The corpses of the generals were buried, and several more tombs appeared on the outskirts of the capital, but nothing happened in the capital. This took many people by surprise. It must be known that the will of the imperial court had been so unyielding in the last 4 days that it seemed particularly cruel. Everyone believed that the Orthodox Academy and Chun Chong Sheng would inevitably face a storm, even if the Li Palace had once more unhesitatingly expressed its desire to protect them. In the autumn wind and rain, it was not the army of the imperial court that came to the Orthodox Academy, but Madame Shui. In the spring, the Orthodox Academy had its discussion building repaired, and Chun Chong Sheng met with Madame Shui here. Madame Shui once more expressed her sincere gratitude, and Chun Chong Sheng once more expressed that he did not need to care. Madame Shui said, In truth, my late husband has always been very curious about Sir. Chun Chong Sheng was somewhat confused. Divine General Shui actually mentioned me in the estate. Just as he had said yesterday, there was no friendship between him and the Shui clan, and they could even be considered strangers. He could not understand why Shui Xingchuan would mention him in the family. Of course, he might discuss matters of the imperial court with his wife or the divine empress's worries. But as for curiosity, it was presumably a more private domain that had nothing to do with the rumors of Crown Prince Xiaoming. Madame Shui looked at him and said, He said that Sir was the second true person he had seen in his life. Ever since Xining came to the capital, the common people had many evaluations of Chun Chong Sheng. For example, he was brimming with talent, or he was calm and mature, or he was as tranquil as a spring breeze. He did not know that before Shui Xingchuan, someone had already described him as a true person. Madame Shui said, My late husband was confused. It was clearly Sir who cut off the arm of his younger brother. So why is it that when Sir occasionally meets him in the palace or elsewhere, you're always so calm? Chun Chong Sheng understood that this was referring to the incident when he was escorting Su Li back to the south on the wastelands, when he used the intellectual sword he had just learned to cut off the arm of divine General Shui He. Afterwards, he and Shui Xingchuan had met quite a few times. Logically speaking, perhaps out of guilt or vigilance, he should have revealed a few strange emotions, but he did not. He had not even discussed these matters with Shui Xingchuan, treating them as if they had never happened. Shui He once said that if I did not kill him, he would remember my kindness. Chun Chong Sheng thought this over, then said, They are brothers, and I did not want divine General Shui to remember this kindness, so I did not mention it. Madame Shui was deeply moved. On the wastelands, Shui He had said, You did not kill me, only cut off one of my arms, so I will remember your kindness. The world was filled with mutual deceit, so a normal person would definitely not take these words seriously. But Chun Chong Sheng took them seriously. Shui Xingchuan thought for a very long time before he understood that his calmness and lack of mention were probably because he had taken these words seriously. On that night, he sighed to his wife, Chun Chong Sheng, truly a true person. Chapter 6, 87. A true person was a very unusual praise. Qin Changsheng was quiet for a while, then asked, "There's another one?" Madame Xue had previously said that he was one of the two true persons that Xue Xingchuan believed to be. Madame Xue did not directly answer this question, but changed her method. "Sir is truly worthy of being the divine empress's son." Qin Changsheng understood and said, "Regretfully, I am not her son." Madame Xue replied, "I am very gratified to hear Sir say that it is regretful." Qin Changsheng replied, "Yes, I do not think that it is shameful to have this sort of mother. Although she was not a good person, she was an extraordinary person." Madame Xue sighed, "Yes, or else how could my late husband and the others have been willing to follow the empress until death?" Qin Changsheng suddenly asked, "Do you hate?" In terms of hate, Madame Xue had far too many reasons to hate, and in terms of regret, she had reasons to regret. This hate and regret was not all for the new government. It was for that supervisor of the Ministry of Justice, for Su Shiji, and probably also for that period of time in the past. Madame Xue was very calm, saying, "No, I only hate that Zhou Tong did not die." Qin Changsheng calmly gazed into her eyes, saying nothing, not comforting her. Madame Xue was extremely intelligent and understood. She was rather shocked and moved. She wanted to advise him, but she could not open her mouth, as she did not know what to say. Qin Changsheng had said nothing, so how could she advise him? The two bid farewell. In front of the Orthodox Academy, Qin Changsheng said to Madame Xue, "Please do not leave." Based on a news sent by the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education, the Xue estate was already empty. There were several boxes of luggage prepared at the back gate. It seemed that Madame Xue might return home in the near future. But Qin Changsheng requested that she not leave. Madame Xue understood his meaning, because he understood her meaning. She fell silent for a very long time. Then, with some difficulty, she revealed a faint smile. "Fine, I will personally see." Qin Changsheng replied, "Sir will see." After the confiscation, the Xue estate had dismissed all its servants, whether it was the chief branch or the second branch. As long as they had not been implicated, they had all been sent back to their homes. The estate now only had Madame Xue, a servant woman, and an old steward. It seemed particularly cold and cheerless. Madame Xue's intentions were that even this servant woman and steward should leave, but she had no way of persuading them. The maidservant said, "Since we're going to hold a sacrifice, no matter how simple it is, we still have to buy some things. We can help Madame share some of the burden." Madame Xue shook her head. "He's already been buried, so what need is there to hold a ceremony?" The housekeeper said, "Since the imperial court has not said anything, it means that they have tacitly agreed. Presumably, in the coming days, there will be some officials or old colleagues who will come to pay their respects. We have to welcome them." He had spoken according to his old way of thinking, but he had caused Madame Xue to grieve. She indifferently said, "Do you think that anyone would dare to come?" The housekeeper thought that the master was a hero of his generation and had many friends in the capital. As long as the imperial court did not issue an edict, someone would come. Madame Xue asked, "Since we want to hold a sacrifice, where will we find the money?" The housekeeper thought for a moment and said, "I can't sell the sacrificial field in the suburbs of the capital for the time being. As for the shop on Shiji Street, the Xue Manor didn't have enough money now. If they wanted to build a decent praying hall, they had to sell the properties of the clan that hadn't been confiscated, and they had to sell the best properties. Shiji Street was the most flourishing place in the capital, and the shops on the street could be said to bring in gold every day. No one had ever been willing to sell them." The housekeeper saw Madame Xue's hesitant expression and thought that she was unwilling to part with them. He advised, "After returning to the village, there will be no one to look after the shops, and they'll be gone sooner or later. Since they won't be coming back, there's no need to keep them." Madame Xue was quiet for a while, then said, "Don't sell the shops." The housekeeper was somewhat shocked. He continued to advise, "Madam, please." Madame Xue shook her head. "I know what you're worried about, but I've already changed my mind. I won't be leaving the capital." The housekeeper was even more shocked at these words, but before he had time to say anything, he heard the madam continue, "In a few days, go back to the village and bring Brother Jin back." Brother Jin's full name was Xue Yejin. and he was Shui, he's only son. The housekeeper already knew that second master Shui, he was currently being escorted back to the capital and would probably not be able to escape death. Brother Jean was currently the sole scion of the Shui estate. 2 days ago, after confirming the imperial court's decree, Madame Shui had sent him back to the family in the middle of the night. Why had Madame Shui decided to have him return to the capital? It had to be known that this was an enormous risk. Who knew if those newly ascended figures in the imperial court had changed their minds? With a trembling voice, he said, "Even if Brother Jean returns, how can he watch over those shops? Brother Jean is the only bloodline of my Shui clan. How can he waste his time on these common affairs?" Madame Shui seriously said to him, "When he returns to the capital, he needs to study." The housekeeper inwardly groaned, thinking just which school in the capital would dare to accept a descendant of the Shui clan, let alone the Six Ivies. Even a most ordinary school would probably reject Brother Jean at its door. Madame Shui did not speak of her subsequent plans. She said to the housekeeper, "Go and busy yourself with the funeral. As for the money, use this for now. If it's not enough, then we'll talk about it." As she spoke, she took a pure gold hairpin from her hair and handed it over. The housekeeper could only accept the order and take the hairpin out of the door. The maidservant brought over a bowl of tea and said, "Madam should first moisten your throat." Madame Shui took a sip of the tea. As she gazed at her pale face reflected in the tea, she suddenly revealed a smile. Unlike the past few days, although her smile was still tired, it was at least a little brighter. And then she felt that the tea was somewhat sweet. If there was blood in the throat, it should also be sweet. This was what she had discussed with Shui Xingchuan. At the time, they had just gotten married. On the second day that she was in charge of the family's financial affairs, she discovered that there were many problems with the clan's accounts and that a lot of money was flowing in the wrong direction. It just so happened that there were many rumors going around in the estate at the time. She was somewhat sad that she had not eaten soup at dinner. Shui Xingchuan had no other choice but to tell her the truth. Only then did she know that her husband had been adopted and that he had a brother called Zhou Tong. In order to comfort her, Shui Xingchuan told her many other things and interesting stories, as well as stories from the battlefield. For instance, if there was blood in the throat, it should be sweet. If that golden hairpin pierced the throat, it should also be sweet. Madame Shui thought, from the very start, she had never intended to leave the capital. She had intended to bury Shui Xingchuan, then commit suicide and follow him. But yesterday, the situation changed. She was no longer prepared to die. She was prepared to continue living in the capital, because she wanted to personally see Zhou Tong die. She also wanted to raise the sole descendant of the Shui clan in the capital, because she wanted him to go to the Orthodox Academy to study. Weeping could be heard from outside the courtyard. The servant woman led in a noble woman with red and swollen eyes. The noble woman entered the room and threw herself into Madame Shui's embrace, crying, "Mother, how can we live like this?" Madame Shui gazed at her eldest daughter who had married the assistant minister of rights and calmly asked, "You were divorced?" The noble woman was given a fright, and then she angrily retorted, "I didn't do anything wrong. How could the Wei clan dare to divorce me?" Madame Shui asked, "Since you weren't divorced, why are you crying?" The noblewoman's eyes reddened once more as she replied, "They treated me badly." Madame Shui replied, "If your husband's clan is not willing to accept you, just come back." The noblewoman somewhat awkwardly replied, "In the last few days, father-in-law and mother-in-law have had rather unpleasant expressions, but he can still be considered amiable." Madame Shui calmly replied, "Amiable? If he continues to be amiable, then divorce him." The noblewoman was somewhat hesitant. "Then what about the child? Besides, he's treated me pretty well. In the future, once the matter is settled, Brother Jin's prospects." Madame Shui said, "Whether Brother Jin joins the army in the future or enters the court, you run a store, or remarry, how can you not find a way to survive?" The noblewoman thought this over, then forcefully nodded her head. "Mother's words are reasonable. I will tell him exactly what you said. I am extremely satisfied with today's chapter. From the start of the new volume until now, this is my favorite chapter. Chapter 688. Zhou Tong looked at the middle-aged man in front of him and smiled, his smile somewhat deep and unfathomable. Were these Madame Xue's original words? The middle-aged man's expression was rather uneasy. My wife has an impatient personality, but I presume that she would not lie in a fit of pique. Thank you, Lord Assistant Minister, for coming to say these words to me. Zhou Tong's attitude was very sincere, his eyes very warm. But after Assistant Minister Wei of the Bureau of Rights left, his eyes very quickly turned cold. The events of that night had occurred only a few days ago. As the person involved, he naturally would not forget them. Naturally, his loyal subordinates wouldn't forget it either. To be more precise, the beginning of that night was that blade glow in the crabapple courtyard. He had almost died at Chun Changxing's hand. If not for that blade, perhaps the situation would not have developed too differently, but the role he would have played in this matter would probably have been different. Xue Xingchuan was his only friend in the world. Xue Xingchuan was the only person in the world who trusted him. Thus, he had been poisoned to death. On that day in the Imperial Palace, he had received the treatment of the Sacred Light Technique and Shang Xingzhou's personal treatment, so his injuries were almost completely healed. He would have an even higher status in the new dynasty, even greater authority, even more unshakable. To declare and prove this to the entire world, Xue Xingchuan's corpse had been thrown on the official road and not allowed to be buried. In the end, Chun Changsheng was taking care of Xue Xingchuan's corpse. Madame Xue was not prepared to leave the capital. That child called Brother Jean was about to be brought back, and the Xue estate actually still wanted to hold a funeral. Zhou Tong naturally understood what these matters meant. This was a slap to his face. The crabapple tree had already been reduced to splinters, the courtyard in ruins, and the buildings of the department for purging officials above ground had all been destroyed. Only the underground prison was still relatively intact. Zhou Tong stood in the ruins, silently gazing at the faint clouds in the sky, his thoughts inscrutable. A subordinate saw his rather lonely expression and probingly asked, "My lord, my face has always been very thick, or else I would not have lived until today." Zhou Tong indifferently said, "Principal Chun has already slapped the left side of my face. If he's still interested, I can turn my head and let him slap the right side of my face until he's happy." The subordinate said unwillingly, "Why?" Zhou Tong drew back his gaze from the sky and expressionlessly said, "Just because he is Principal Shang's student, His Majesty's junior brother, and the Pope's chosen successor, he has the right to slap my face." Exposing the corpses of Xue Xingchuan and the other officers of the Imperial Guard to the wilderness was a decree of the Imperial Court. Who would dare defy it? If Chun Changsheng dared, who would dare to use the crime of disobeying the laws of the Zhou dynasty or defying the edict to punish him? Why? Just as Zhou Tong had said, if the Imperial Court did not want to split with the orthodoxy right after overthrowing the Divine Empress, it could only endure. Even the Imperial Court had to endure it, not to mention that Zhou Tong was just a member of the Imperial Court, even if he was a high-ranking official. The subordinate said angrily, "Then how long do we have to endure it?" Zhou Tong was silent for a while, then said, "If even the Empress will die, then everyone will die." He was not speaking of Chun Changsheng, but the Pope who had admitted in front of the Mausoleum of Books that he was old and about to die. On the day the Pope returned to the Sea of Stars, perhaps Chun Changsheng really would become the next Pope, but whether it was the Imperial Court, Shang Xingzhou, or the collective will of the Orthodoxy, none of them would permit him to act like a young man, even though he was still very young. This was the principle that if one wanted to wear the divine crown, one had to bear its weight. Zhou Tong only needed to endure this period of time. It's just slapping the face, not killing. There were many people in the world that wanted Zhou Tong dead. Currently, many ministers of the new court, including the Prince of Zhongshan and several other princes, wanted nothing more than to eat his flesh raw, yet they could do nothing. Chun Changsheng could use many methods to express his disdain for Zhou Tong, could use many different methods to slap his face, but he could not kill him. Just as he had said many times, he represented Shang Xingzhou's promise to the entire world. The subordinate was still somewhat uneasy, asking, "Then the Shui estate is holding a sacrifice?" Holding a sacrifice? In my opinion, that's more like digging a hole. Zhou Tong chuckled, then said to his subordinates, "It's not important whether or not the courtyard can be restored to its original state, but I want this place to have a crabapple tree. It has to be exactly the same as the crabapple tree from before. Remember to dig the hole a little deeper, that way it'll be easier to live." To this small courtyard in the alley of the Northern Military Department, that crabapple tree was very important, just like he was to the current world. Both were symbols of some sort. Rebuilding Zhou Prison was a very troublesome project. The Ministry of Works and the capital government had sent over many laborers and outstanding craftsmen. The project proceeded very smoothly. In just 2 days, it had already begun to take shape, but time was still very tight. Even after nightfall, the laborers were still hard at work. A hole had been dug under the courtyard wall. The hole was very deep, so any kind of crabapple tree could grow very well in it. At the deepest point of the night, the laborers and craftsmen finally went to rest. No one noticed a figure arrive at the wall and then jump into the hole. Swish, swish, swish. The tiny sound of a blade cutting into tofu rang out. Countless cold glints flashed from the figure's fingertips, but they were clearly not weapons. The earth on the wall of the hole rustled and fell off like real tofu. And then the figure vanished. The Shui estate held a funeral. The mourning hall was within the estate. It was impossible to see it on the street, only a white pan. Besides this, there was no other change. There wasn't even the sound of weeping or music. It was truly desolate to the extreme. There was no music because no musicians dared to accept the work of the Shui estate. There was no weeping because no guests had come to pay their respects. Thus, whether sincere or not, the people of the estate could not continue to mourn. This was a scene that many people had already anticipated. Shui Xingchuan's remains had been collected by Chun Changsheng. The funeral of the Shui estate naturally had a different meaning. Some people even believed that this was a contest between the imperial court and the orthodoxy, between Shang Xingzhou and Chun Changsheng, master and disciple. This funeral could clearly see the direction of the wind in the capital and even the entire continent. From a certain perspective, the people who had come to pay their respects to Shui Xingchuan were also paying their respects to the divine empress. There were assuredly people who were loyal to the old Tianhai dynasty, but who dared to show it. In the desolate mourning hall, the housekeeper gazed at Madame Shui and sadly said, "It seems that no one will come, let alone the ministers of the court, the generals of the army, and those old friends." Not even the Li Palace had responded. Only Linghai Zhuang and Daoist Siyuan had come early in the morning to pay their respects. These two prefects of the orthodoxy actually had an ordinary personal relationship with Shui Xingchuan, but everyone knew that they were the same as Shui Xingchuan, both of them firm supporters of the Tianhai divine empress. Madame Shui gazed at the empty gate of the estate and calmly said, "There will always be some people who want to come. Even if it's inconvenient for them to come, we still have to wait." Yes, many people in the capital wanted to pay their respects to Shui Xingchuan. Given the friendship they had with Shui Xingchuan, it would be inexcusable for them not to come. But for various reasons, they did not dare to come, putting them in an extremely difficult position. Just as Zhou Tong had said, the Shui estate holding a funeral was like digging a pit for these people. Would they jump or not? Time slowly passed. The sun slowly moved. The hour had arrived. The Shui estate was still deserted. No one had come.